We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com.
Welcome to another edition of AV Rant. I'm Tom Andry, and I'm here with
Rob H. This is AV Rant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered. Tom is on a new microphone this week, so
yes, I'm testing
feedback,
out this
I
microphone.
guess. We'll see what happens.
Please,
Yeah.
if it sounds good, let me know. If it sounds bad, also let me know.
All
because
right.
I don't know what it sounds like because I didn't get a chance. I just hooked it up and made it look right in the waveform.
Yep.
And that was it. So I am connected via all of my normal stuff.
Okay.
So this is a microphone that is both USB powered or USB connected and XLR enabled. So
Gotcha.
you can XLR it, which is what I'm doing right now.
Okay. All right.
I don't know. It's a dynamic microphone, so I'm not used to these things.
Okay.
So maybe that's part of it. I don't know. Maybe
Yeah. As you
the
move
Phantom
around,
power's on?
it's gonna be more noticeable as you move away from talking straight down the barrel of the mic. So
I don't know. These people, I see people like So I like the aesthetics of it.
All right.
Generally speaking,
All right.
of this microphone, it is an cherry. I don't know what does that say. XTRFY. How would you pronounce that?
I think you just have to say XTRFY. That isn't really an acronym.
I know. I don't know what that is. XTRFY.
XTRFY, I suppose. Yeah, if you insert some vowels that are not present.
Clearly not present.
Of course, Tom has to move around more than ever before now.
I am going to keep moving just to screw with this whole thing. So this podcast will feature this microphone.
That's what it is. Aside from that,
like I said, I literally have no idea what this sounds like. Yeah. I will not know until I listen back to the recording at the end.
Through Skype, it is to my ears not sounding as good as your old microphone, but we'll see what the actual recording turns out like, because goodness knows Skype is not representative of what the final
I could have it
is.
set up wrong. I don't know. I did do a USB recording with this thing earlier, but I did not. So because it does connect via USB, I did not listen to it. I will tell you that the waveform was like bitty.
Oh, okay.
Like it had this was just going through Audacity. It had no gain whatsoever. So I don't know. Maybe I got a broken one. I don't know.
It's not broken. I mean, it functions, but
it functions.
We'll see. Let us know, folks. Let us know how Tom sounds.
Yes.
And aside from that, I warned Tom ahead of time because I know how much he wanted to dive into everything that Apple talked about.
I did not know that Apple had
the first day of WWDC. They sent out their hour and 45-minute long video, which
did not watch.
I mean, they duped me. They duped me into ending up watching the whole thing because I'm like, is something interesting going to happen? Surely something interesting is going to happen within the next 5 to 10 minutes. And they didn't say how long the video was going to be. So I thought I was like, okay, this is going to be an hour-long thing because it seemed like they had about an hour's worth of content when they laid out their outline at the beginning. But yeah, wow. Shockingly nothing much updating in all those OSs. They had very little to say about Vision OS for the Apple Vision Pro. That they got that out of the way exceedingly quickly at the beginning because, man, I think they're trying to sweep that thing under the rug as far as I can tell. They showed it like once just sitting on in all their video presentations in their.
It was in timeout.
Extremely glossy, gleamy, no dust has ever entered this Earth type of worlds that they show. They had an Apple Vision Pro just like sitting on a coffee table. I don't think the battery unit was even plugged into the head unit. It's just like that was as much as it featured in the rest of the presentation.
I just assume it's going to be like every other Apple event where it's like, hey, look at this thing that everybody else has been doing for 5 years.
Well, that was
we're going to do
most of the OS stuff was, hey, you can put the icons on your iPhone home screen not just in a simple grid. You can actually move them to other locations now, and you can change their colors. And that was about it, honestly. And I'm not even like exaggerating or making this up or even doing it to make fun of Apple. The most exciting thing that they introduced was the calculator for iPad, Not just that they finally have a native calculator app, because they haven't until this point for the iPad, but the things that you can do in that new iPad calculator app, such as just sketching out a diagram and having it automatically do calculus for you. I'm like, that is actually pretty useful and cool. Like, you know, just like...
But they've had stuff like that where you just take your phone and you take a use the camera to take a picture of the math problem, and it gives you the answer. My kids have... I mean, I've known about this for years. Yes. I've tried to keep it away from my children, but I'm sure they know about it.
I don't know if it was that good at the calculus stuff, though, just doing that.
I don't know about that either.
So being able to just...
I don't do a lot of math. Being
able to just sketch that out, not to scale, and have it do calculus for you, I was like, okay, that's actually could be very useful and pretty cool. But that was like the most exciting thing. But then they spent the entire last 45 minutes on... It's AI, but it can't be artificial intelligence because it's an A, so it has to be Apple intelligence. And I know that first of all, groan and cringe at that. But the whole thing.
Tell me you're a member of a cult without telling me you're a member of a cult.
The whole
thing. It's not AI, it's Apple AI.
Yes,
Apple intelligence.
It really did.
So many smart apples out there.
Feel uncomfortable in a way I didn't entirely expect. Because I mean, the entire feeling I got was, do you just not like humans? Because we're here for you if you just don't like humans.
They don't.
I don't think they do.
No.
You have children, but would you really prefer to not have to spend any effort or time on those children? Because Apple AI is here for you.
Raise them for you?
Yes. Would you much prefer to... see your children through a pair of lenses that can then sterilize and homogenize your memories for you? Because we don't want things...
I've seen this that Black Mirror episode, right?
Yes.
I saw that one.
We don't want things like...
You can replay your memories and stuff?
Yeah.
I've seen that one.
We don't want the accurate photographs of your vacation with your children where they weren't smiling and there was, heaven forbid, an East Asian person in the background. We don't want that. The only East Asian person to appear in the entire presentation was literally removed before our eyes by Apple intelligence. I'm like, there's something going on there.
You're not white enough. You cannot be in our advertisements.
Or like perfectly photogenically black enough, because those are the only two that exist. That's diversity in our Apple
diversity. World. It's like the Harkonnen world.
Maybe a stereotypical Asian. As long as you're an Asian who's good at math and can demonstrate on your calculator, you can be in our presentation. I mean, it was very cringe-inducing, but like I wasn't necessarily expecting it. And then
this is what happens. This is what happens when you get in a room full of people that all agree with you. You get insular, and suddenly what seemed like good ideas to you and all your friends, you're at a bar getting you're getting called out, dragged outside, and beat the crap out of because you're a super racist. And everybody's like, what?
I mean, it was also like,
how did that happen?
Are you somehow creative enough that you just have this unquenchable urge to express yourself and a gazillion ideas that you can't get out, but zero desire to develop the skills to ever express those ideas? That's what Apple Intelligence is here for you. Also, do you want to express your admiration for your parents by turning them into horrible NFT images? Because that's what our generative AI will do. Because every generative AI image that they showed was a horrible NFT-looking piece of crap. And I'm like, oh, man.
I will tell you that before this episode, Rob said, I didn't really want to talk about this Apple event, but I'm sure you'll want to make fun of it. And I have not said a word, hardly. I can't get a word. I'm trying to make fun of it, and Rob's just on a roll. It
was very disturbing.
Acknowledge that?
And then they talked on and on and on about how they're doing AI differently because it's not artificial intelligence, it's Apple intelligence, and they care about privacy. They were about privacy. All the computation, it's being done on device, but if it can't be done on device, then they have like this private cloud server that you have to specify, hey, upload only the necessary data to the Apple cloud server where they won't read any of it. It's encrypted end to end, and it's only the information that's needed for this particular task, and that's great. They went on and on and on about it. I was like, okay, you're at least, if nothing else, paying some lip service to the fears that people have over all of the data gathering and training the AI on people's information. Then, for like the last 10 minutes, they're like, also, we partnered up with OpenAI and everything gets shared with ChatGPT. I was like, wait a second, what in the heck are you doing?
But we won't sell your data. We won't sell your data.
I mean, they say, you know, you have to agree. You have to agree to share your information with ChatGPT, but it just completely undercut. They just kneecapped themselves on everything they could have just talked about. It was a bizarre presentation. I don't understand what they even thought they were doing with I don't know, man. It was freaky. It was really freaky. But yes, the overarching feeling I got out of everything was they just really don't like humans.
I've kind of gotten that feeling for a long time because I've used their devices, and it's clear. They're like, we don't trust you. They don't trust you. I mean, we don't think you really know what you want. Therefore, we're going to give you what we know you want.
You are an idiot. I mean, they had their whole thing, because people have been like, okay, those new iPads came out, fantastic screens. Everybody is universally like, the screens, wonderful. And I believe that. I haven't actually seen them or used them yet, but I have no real reason to doubt that. That is universal praise across. And they're like, way more processing power than you actually need for an iPad. So everyone's like, okay, what are they going to announce at WWDC that's going to take advantage of those M4 chips in these brand new iPads? What is it going to be? There really was nothing. And then it was also like, well, one thing we are using all of this processing power for is when you handwrite on it, we're going to fix that, because we're pretty sure your handwriting sucks and even you can't read it. So in real time, we're going to fix the kerning and we're going to fix the relative
size. That's about the only thing that Apple has ever announced that I've gone, you know what? I could use that.
And they're like, and you can copy like typed text and bring it into your handwritten note, and we'll convert it into handwriting that looks like a good version of your crappy handwriting, because that's how much we think of you.
That would actually help. I would actually. No. That appeals to me.
Okay,
because I do have crappy handwriting.
You better go spend $2,500 on an Apple iPad
am not
Pro.
Doing
then,
that.
Yeah,
I am not doing that. For $2,500, I could have somebody follow me around and rewrite the 5 things a year I write down that need to be legible.
Yeah.
Okay. Because believe me, everybody I know has bad handwriting. Everybody who reads my handwriting already has handwriting that's just as bad as mine, and they can translate it. So if I need to write something that somebody else that I don't know needs to read, like a check, God forbid, a check, I write a check a year.
Yeah.
If that. So, yes.
There we go. That was Apple. I'm not even an Apple hater. I'm often the one who defends a lot of the stuff that they, because I kind of.
Did we not see this coming with that commercial thing they released?
I know. What are they doing?
Because I didn't even see. I don't pay attention to anything that Apple does because I honestly don't care.
Yeah.
But there were so many videos on YouTube about people just tearing that thing apart. And I was like, what are they talking about? And then I watched just one of them. Just picked one of them. I was like, oh.
Yeah.
Oh.
Who
thought that was a good idea?
That is absolutely all of it is that type of thing where you're like, I can comprehend where they were coming from. I can work my way backwards and be like, I'm pretty sure this is the notion they had that sounded good in their head. And then what actually was demonstrated, it just makes you go, ugh, that was it in a nutshell.
I've crushed your, like, all of the things that you love in this world.
Yeah.
It's literally bleeding through the bottom of this press. And here, I've got this little screen for you to play with now.
This is going to make it better.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Okay, all of you incel, misogynist jerks out there who love to say to Star Wars and
I know what Tom's been watching this week.
You're ruining my childhood. You finally have a legitimate reason to say you're ruining my childhood, and it's to Apple.
Yeah.
Just get it all out now. Just get it all out. Everybody will be on board. Get it all out now. Just let it fly. This is your chance. All right, Rob, what did you watch this week other than this hour and a half long Apple train wreck.
Yeah. Oh, that did not leave me in a good mood. Since we shared something that we both watched this week, I'll start with the movie that I watched, which was The First Omen. This is available on Disney Plus now, starring Nell Tiger-Free, who is an actress I wasn't really familiar with. She was in Game of Thrones, and she was in Servant, that thing on Apple TV Plus. And so, yeah, I thought very well cast for the vast majority of this movie, because she just has that sort of face and look where you're like, okay, I mean, she's clearly could be a model, you know, tall, thin, very good looking, but they're able, through whatever makeup or lack of makeup and lighting, to like kind of make her look like she could be a pretty normal and very innocent faced type of person. And so she played that role very well, because she's supposed to be someone who's, you know, becoming a nun, but gets introduced to this whole plot because this is supposed to be a prequel to the original Omen. And so you know, this whole plot of bringing around the Antichrist is what it's all for. And so I thought she played that very well. But towards the very end of this movie, they require a tremendous physical performance from her character as she goes through like a physical transformation. And I was just kind of like, ooh, she didn't quite pull that off. Yeah, because for whatever reason, it just didn't quite have the physicality necessary, and they just locked the camera on her and let her do her thing. And sometimes you see a performance that blows you away when they keep it that simple. But this one I was kind of like, ooh. Maybe needed a few more takes on that one. But this movie, The First Omen, I mean, it's Rosemary's Baby. I mean, they just remade Rosemary's Baby. That's what this movie is. And like I was seeing the reviews for it, and there was all sorts of praise for it. People saying it's like their favorite horror movie in such a long time, and their maybe even their favorite movie of the year and stuff. Like from reviewers that I don't just dismiss out of hand, like from people that I actually have a fair amount of trust for it. And I was like, I just didn't see it. Like, not that it was bad. It certainly wasn't a bad movie, but it was Rosemary's Baby. And even like at the end, they had some like shot for shot parts of Rose. I was like, that was a shot for shot recreation from Rosemary's Baby. So
I mean, I have seen Rosemary's Baby, but I don't think I've seen it in maybe 30 years.
I felt all the effusive praise for it was a little bit strange. You know, but I mean, the thing is, like, I'm not Catholic, I'm not Christian, so a lot of that doesn't quite play into having been brought up that way, you know, like...
Yeah, but that, they basically go, whenever there's possession or demons or whatever, they always use the Catholic iconography.
They sure do.
You know, that they just kind of love to go back to that, even though there's no reason why. And we're just
supposed to be inherently creeped out by people whispering Latin, you know, and stuff like that. And I like, that doesn't scare me. They're speaking Latin. They're just speaking it quietly. That isn't inherently scary to me. And a lot of this movie kind of depended on that being scary to you. So I don't know. It didn't quite grab me. It didn't quite chill me to the bone or anything like that. And yeah, it seemed like a recreation of Rosemary's Baby, but under the Omen the series. So that was that one. What did you watch, Tom?
I'm remembering as I'm because I'm writing more things down as
you are writing more things down as we go.
All right, so I saw the movie Big, which Tom Hanks, you know, the old school.
Been around for a while, that one.
Yes. After the debacle that was Godzilla -1.
What?
And everybody. Well, I mean, my wife falling asleep and me not watching it.
Viewing experience, yeah, not the movie itself.
The proper, you know, language.
Okay.
I was like, I'm not choosing the movie this week.
Okay.
You fools choose the movie. I don't care. I don't care. You choose the movie.
All right.
So, my wife chose Big.
Interesting.
And now, you know, I was like, oh, you know, some of these old movies, especially that one, don't necessarily hold up that well. But it's pretty easy to hand wave.
Okay.
Maybe it's not all that creepy. Maybe when she finds out that he's really a boy and she says, keep my number, maybe that was playful innocence.
Yeah.
And not weird.
It had to be.
At all. And when he turns back to the boy and she's like, not like shuddering in revulsion. Maybe she's just in shock that it was real. Maybe it's okay. You know, you can kind of... There's some movies that really don't hold up. This one's It's fine.
Okay.
It's fine. Tom Hanks is fine.
Always watchable, enjoyable.
To me, it's interesting to look back at these old movies because movies today, in my opinion, are so. It's almost like politics. They're pushed so extreme into their genres that it's like you can't have a crossover movie anymore. Like Big is a comedy. It is not all that funny. I mean, it is to me, it was rarely funny. I would call it a lot of things. If you said drama, I would agree with you. If you said romantic comedy, I'd have to agree with you, even though I think I shouldn't. And if you said comedy, I would say I don't really think so. Because the way that the movie is it's just more plot. My son was like, "Is this supposed to be funny?" I'm like, "It is." It is funny. There are funny bits,
sure.
And that's what makes a comedy in the 80s.
Yep.
So still a good movie. You know, it's funny at least to watch Tom Hanks then. You know, when he was, I think that was like the first big breakout role he had after whatever the TV show was, where he was living in the only girls building, and him and his roommate were cross-dressing to
I should
do it.
know that, but I don't remember.
I want to say Trading Spaces, but that's the
that's not right.
But it's something like that.
Okay.
And again, another problematic thing that probably should stay buried in the annals of history. Let's see, what else did I do? I finished X-Men 97.
Okay.
So I finished that.
Yeah.
Which, again, there's like, hey, we want to show you what beyond a mega level in a mutant means.
Right, yeah.
And in case you're wondering, it's Magneto. he is unhappy, and he's going to let everybody know. And if anybody ever thought to
he
themselves,
was fed up.
I think that it would be cool if we had superheroes to solve the world. No, it would not. Imagine all the people that you can think of that have a little too much power in their little spheres of influence, right, and how they wield it. You know, these restaurant managers that are absolute monsters to their employees.
Right.
Give them superpowers and the ability to do things to the entire world, and that's what the world would be like with superheroes.
Yep.
It would be a nightmare.
It is the Greek gods. I got a little ticked off today, so the sun just isn't coming up. What havoc might that wreak?
I've decided
that's right,
that my coffee was too cold, and everyone else is going to suffer because of my hanger and my caffeine headache. Yes. Again, it's overall it's good. There's nothing not to like about it. You know, the only thing that's ever really bothered me about comic books in general and superheroes and all that other stuff is the fact that they just can't commit to somebody being dead unless they don't.
Definitely not. I know. Well, especially not Marvel.
It drives me nuts.
Nobody stays dead in Marvel.
Nobody stays dead. So there are mutants that died during the course of the thing, and I'm just waiting for them to come back. And I know they're going to. Everybody's like, "Oh, I'm so sad that so and so died." I'm like, "He's not dead.
I know. He's
just in Australia. That's what happens. They go to Australia when they die." So I'm not. I don't know. That's the only thing that reminds me of how much it bugs me that they won't just kill characters. Like, just kill them. Just kill them. I know they're money for you. I know that. But at the same time, don't say you're going to kill them and then not kill them. If you weren't on the planet in the last week, then maybe you didn't know that the United States beat Pakistan in cricket. Because I certainly didn't know it until I opened up my social media and there was a bunch of sort of excited Americans and a lot of very confused Pakistanis who were posting about what is going on.
I can't I called my Indian cricket.
I don't either, because it's very hard to follow, because there's only one streaming service that has it in the United States. It's called Willow. I've never heard of that until this week. And so I called my Indian friends and I said, "Hey man, what's going on with the cricket?" And he's like, "It's the World Cup. It's in the United States. It's the first time the United States has ever been invited, and they're the top of their bracket.
Yeah.
And they're 2-0, and they just beat the number 6 team in the world." I'm like, I guess go USA.
Took them too lightly. That's what happens.
Yeah, I guess. So I'm like, are you watching the cricket? And he's like, well, I wasn't, but I'm going to start now.
Nah.
So he got Willow, and he's like, why don't you come over Sunday morning and we'll watch the India versus Pakistan game, which, of course, I got to be for India. Plus, we already beat Pakistan, so I want to see them lose again. So I got to go watch cricket for the first time since I was in Australia, which if it really... Okay, first of all, 5 minutes worth of YouTube videos, and you can understand the basic rules of cricket in the same way that you can understand the basic rules of baseball or football.
Yeah,
you can understand the basic. You will not get the nuance. You will not understand some of the other
little
stuff.
Intricacies.
If you can find somebody to watch it with, it makes it a huge difference because they start explaining things to you during the game. Because believe me, there's downtime in cricket. There's lots of opportunities to talk. I will tell you that. Just like if you're a baseball fan, cricket's for you. Very interesting game. We had a really good time watching that. And I didn't get through the whole thing because there was 2 rain delays and it was like 3.5 hours long. It's just fixed.
Yeah, they go on a while.
So last but not least,
that's right.
You and I both watched the same thing.
We did. The first 2 episodes of
The Acolyte.
The Acolyte, Star Wars, the latest Star Wars thing on Disney Plus. So yeah, I mean, I basically...
Cue the incels.
Well, I mean, I don't even want to comment on that because I don't know what the heck is going on. Because I did try to look up a review or two, and again, went to places that I already know and trust. But I was like, if you just type in The Acolyte review, you are just inundated with the worst headlines and weirdo takes and stuff. So I'm like, holy smokes.
I need, you know what Apple I needs to do for me? Like any obviously terrible takes on Star Wars, comic book movies, the world.
Yes.
Just filter all that out for me, please.
But,
just don't give them any clicks.
It seems like just even more than I've ever seen. They have really keyed in on Star Wars.
They hit the trifecta here. They have people of color.
Yes.
They've got a woman, two women leads, female leads, and it's a prequel to the prequel. So
it sure
God
is.
Help us all. So
I mean, I'm trying to put all of that out of my head and just watch the show. So I do feel it would be kind of difficult to watch this show with no prior knowledge of anything Star Wars. I don't feel like they are necessarily introducing and making this show for someone where this is the very first Star Wars thing they have ever seen. You gotta
kind of understand that there's Jedi and
you gotta have a
lightsabers,
pretty decent familiarity with much of it.
I think it's fair to assume that, though, at this point. Do we really need to say Spider-Man's and Superman's and Batman's whole history over and over again?
I'm not knocking it. It's just one of those things that occurred to me. And then I also felt like, because I don't know how this show is going to go, and I feel like storytelling wise, they've kind of buried the lead and they've kind of done the storytelling faux pas of, I don't really know why I'm supposed to care about the main character just yet. Like they've hinted at it. There's all these hints at it. I'm thinking episode 3 is probably going to be a flashback because storytelling wise, it feels like everything has led up to episode 3 being the flashback where we find out the whole reason why we care about the main character. But to me, that's a little bit of a storytelling faux pas where you're like, just trust us. There's a reason that you're going to care. I'm like, okay, maybe you do just a tease at the beginning to just get me invested in this character. And then you wait for the filling out things in a flashback in a later episode. But give me some tease, give me some reason to care at the beginning. I didn't quite get that, but Andor was similar. I felt like Andor was a slow burn, and
it was a very slow
burn.
And
the first 3-4 episodes were definitely not the most engaging, strongest part of that show, but it ended up being terrific by the end. So I'm willing to believe that The Acolyte could end up being another one of the series where I'm like, okay, started a little slow, but ended up being terrific. I've only seen 2 episodes, so I don't know yet. It could go either way for me. But yeah, I do agree with some of what I think is a bit of a fair criticism, which is that it does. Not necessarily like the whole universe feels small in scope. The way it's shot feels more like television than Star Wars ever has. It feels like TV-sized sets with TV-sized scope. Just in the feeling of individual shots, it had that feeling for me. I was like, oh, this feels smaller. It feels lower budget, even though it isn't.
Right.
And I'm not a huge fan of the fake film grain that they put on top of it, which I actually suspect if we get a disc release version of this, I think that the compression that we're getting through Disney Plus is having an adverse effect on a technical level with the fake film grain filter that they put on there, because it right now, it isn't looking filmy enough, and it also isn't looking digital clean. It's in this weird in-between area where it looks like there was film grain that got partially smoothed by compression, and I'm like, maybe that really is the way it looks, because if we see the disc version that doesn't have as much streaming compression, I'm betting that filter looks better. It's almost as though they didn't check how it looks through Disney Plus streaming, which is obviously where most people are going to see it. So on a technical level, I didn't think it looked the best.
See it.
Yeah.
So the real issue for me, and so far I'm fine with the series. I think that there's nothing.
I'm fine with it. I'm waiting. This is
a series that's clearly. So if you look at the Mandalorian as being more of the Western, the true Western type show, this is more of the martial arts.
There's a little Crouching Tiger type of feel to some of the things.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it does have that sort of, like the very first scene where there's a fight in the bar.
Yes.
I've seen that in like Jackie Chan and Jet Li movies quite a bit. And even the running up the stairs.
Oh, yes, very much so. And the flips through the air, the very much wire work flips through the air and stuff. And
I think as a whole, I'm going to really enjoy more. But the thing that like Rob said, there's two kind of criticisms to me of the show. First is, like Rob said, you don't really know who to care about the most because clearly they want you to care about one character. I mean, that's clear because they are the main character. But the only kind of moment of the show that's supposed to endear us to her is she wakes up and she's nice to her robot.
Right.
You know what I mean? And then from there, it just sort of like the plot starts happening.
Well, and actually, even if that had been the very first scene, I think storytelling wise, it might have worked a bit better. Rather than going for the action first. So a couple things I wanted to touch on. That opening fight in the bar, the Jedi who's fighting, they did a thing in the choreography. It definitely was intentional, but it had a little bit of a dissonance in my mind was watching it, which was that she was literally putting her hand in the position to block a move before the punch was thrown. Now, that's intentional because the Jedi is anticipating where that punch is going to come a moment from now and already has her hand there to block it. And it was like, okay, I know that's intentional. It was clear enough for me to pick up on, but it was almost subtle enough that it almost looked like bad fight choreography. It tread that line for me. It was not quite. I felt like they maybe needed a little bit of a push in or a little bit of a close up at least once to like really clarify that this is anticipation and not just we know this is a fight choreography and I happen to be moving my hand a slightly bit too early because I'm pretty sure that like they did it again in the second episode. So it was very clear at that point, like that it's definitely intentional that's the way the Jedi fight when they don't have their lightsabers out. But yeah, that first one, it threw me a little bit because it was like, oh wait, that kind of looked awkward. But yeah, I just want to say Daphne Keane and Lee Jung-jae. Lee Jung-jae was the lead in that Korean series on Netflix. Flew out of my mind right now. Squid Game.
Squid Game.
That came back to me. And so their two performances I'm liking the most. Like, sans any context, I just instantly liked those two characters. Daphne Keane threw a tremendous amount of makeup. I'm like, oh, she has as much charisma as she did in Logan, So I would very much like to see an X-23 movie with her in it. I'm like that would work. I'm confident she could pull it off. So there we go.
Well, as I was saying, there was two things.
Okay.
The first was that you don't really know who to care about for this character. Which character to really care about. They're trying to get you into this whole world without you, just like Rob said, the trust me, it's going to be good,
right? Yeah,
sort of thing. And the second thing, at least as for a criticism for me, is I feel like there's so many Star Wars tropes that they feel the need to pay homage to even though they're bad tropes.
Okay.
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 You know, even though there's things that Star Wars does and all Star Wars shows and movies do that they should not do, but they do it because George Lucas did it in the first one. The first one was so very, very popular. Right? So you've got the terrible wipes. Right, which they cannot get rid of. They can't get rid of these terrible wipes. You know, if you don't know what a wipe is when they change scenes, and instead of just changing the scene or doing a pan that has like some sort of piece of furniture or wall or something like that just dissolves into something else, or a black screen, they got to do some crazy wipe thing. I'm just waiting for the star wipe to come in. Somebody's going to do it. Which I can't get rid of. And the other thing, and I really don't think that this started in earnest until the prequel movies, is I'm going to show you a scene of a spaceship taking off.
Sure.
And that is the point of this next 10 seconds of your life. You're going to, or 5 seconds of your life. You're going to watch this thing take off. It has no emotional impact. It tells nothing as far as the story is concerned. It doesn't help progress the story. It's just, I made a spaceship.
It's an establishing shot. Yep.
It's nothing. A lot of times it's just, oh, they're leaving this planet. Boop, there it goes. And I am sick of that. I am over it. I want them to use those things in a storytelling and it sticks out so, I think, prominently here because I'm looking for something to grab onto with it.
Right.
And like I said, so far, I really like martial arts shows in general, and this sort of callback to these older martial arts genre movies that I really loved as a kid and high schooler and early college, and watched a ton of. I mean, there was a VHS place that was all imports that you could go rent from in San Francisco when I was going to college there. We used to go there and get all these crazy movies, and we never understood what was being said, but who cares, because there's all this wire work and it's amazing. So I love all this stuff, so I'm really wanting to like this, but the fact that I'm trying so hard to grab onto something to care about, because I'm interested in the story. The story is not poorly told. It's just I need an anchor for me to be like,
hopefully it's coming in episode 3 or 4. We'll find out.
We will see. All right. I think that's everything. So let's talk about this fact that this is a podcast that's not about how much
we've talked. That
Apple.
Was my fault on all the Apple stuff, but let's get going.
AVRant's a podcast that answers your home theater and AV questions. Get your questions answered. All you have to do is ask us by emailing us at question@avrant.com. You go to our website and comment. Nope. I don't think you can do that. But you can find, I think I turned that off again. You can find our episodes, our show notes, and our Flickr album, so you can follow along with the pictures. The audio is there, older episodes. Knock yourselves out. Yeah. Okay, guys and gals. Facebook.com/AVRant podcast, YouTube.com/AVRant. Contact Rob directly, rob@avrant.com. His socials is @FirstReflect. I'm Tom @avrant.com. His socials is @FirstReflect.
Yeah,
I don't know. I feel like that. I feel like that's wrong.
I mean, you can just insert the word handle and then is works, but yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. All right. I want to thank our listeners of the week. To become a listener of the week, support the podcast in some way. One of the ways you can do that is going to avrant.com. Click on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link, and that sends you to a PayPal donation site. And we want to thank Steve for doing that this week. Thank you very much, Steve.
Yeah, that's very nice. That's a PayPal donation from Steve. Thank you very much for that financial support.
We do appreciate it. We also have 135 patrons over at patreon.com/AVRant podcast. These are people who support the podcast monthly. Every month, Patreon takes some money from them and gives most of it to us. So thank you very much to our 135 patrons.
Yeah, once again, that is patreon.com/AVRant podcast if you'd like to sign up to make an automatic monthly donation. So big thanks to our 135 patrons over there.
So, if you can't support us financially, support us in some other way, or I guess ask us to do stuff for you.
Sure.
And that somehow also supports us. So, Vince asked us to help him out because he had a movie code that he wants to test to see if it works.
Right, yes.
He sent it to Rob, but Rob can't use it, so he forwarded it to Lee. And instead, we're going to see how long it takes for Lee to notice that it's in his inbox.
That's right.
We don't think it'll ever happen.
He does have a Lee@avrant.com inbox. He was so proud to get it. Never checks it. So we'll see how long it takes. Next time he's on the podcast, maybe he'll be reminded.
Maybe. Probably not. So thank you, Vince.
Thank you, Vince.
Sasi gave permission to post his subwoofer selector spreadsheet tool at AV Gadgets if I'd like to.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, Sasi. I appreciate that.
It is nice to have that explicit permission. Now Tom knows he won't get sued by Sasi.
That's right. We also got some notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going through, I guess, America finding out that they're good at cricket. Nobody knew.
That is world ending.
It feels like it. I don't know. Something happened in France over the weekend. I think that's pretty
snap election.
I don't know what I just caught a wisp of it right before we started the podcast because I've been working pretty hard recently, and then there's some very upset French people. So I'm very sorry for whatever you're upset about, unless you're upset about something I don't care about, in which case I'm not sorry. You deserve it, I guess. Jeez. So we got notes of gratitude from Ilango, from Vince, who says he understands how making a show every week is a lot more challenging than might be expected. So he thinks we've been incredible, and that he's been a listener ever since the PS4 came out. Sasi, Steve, John H. says he hasn't missed an episode in 5 years, and we continue to be his favorite podcast.
Oh, thanks.
And Dazz says he's unfortunately going through a bit of a rough patch at the moment, but a nice bright spot was watching Godzilla -1. When the other kids had teddy bears, he had a Godzilla toy, and he's seen every Godzilla movie ever.
Yeah. And there are a
-1 might just take the top spot, so that's really saying something coming from him. He's anxiously awaiting the disc release, although it might just he might just import it from Japan. 2 very enthusiastic thumbs up. So thank you for thanking us, Ilango, Vince, Sasi, Steve, John, and Dazz.
That is right. I'll say those names one more time. Ilango, Vince, Sasi, Steve, John, and Dazz. Thank you so much for your notes of gratitude and encouragement. They're very much appreciated. And a big, big thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions.
All right, I am realizing that I both need to go to the bathroom and get more coffee at the same time.
Oh my.
So things are going well.
Also,
on Tomland.
I'll let you know we are definitely hearing the mic bumps a heck of a lot more with this.
Oh
mic.
yeah, I don't have. I'm sorry.
There's no shock.
Thank you. I don't have the spider on this one that keeps that from happening. So thank you, Rob, for pointing that out to me. I will try to keep my hands to myself.
We'll see what happens.
It is so hot in here. I need to lower the AC too. All right, so we've got some news via Dazz. ELAC has announced their new debut 3.0 series of speakers that will be launching in the fall. They've kept the lineup and model names simple. There are 2 bookshelf models, 2 center models, and 2 floor standing models, plus a single wedge-shaped model to either mount on the wall or use as an upward-firing Atmos module. Boy, when SVS came out with the elevation speaker, they knew they had something, and you know that they were right because boy has everybody copied them.
They
like
sure have.
Crazy. These are the first debut series speakers that weren't designed by Andrew Jones. Since he left ELAC in 2022, ELAC claims they have significantly enhanced audio performance that builds a closer bridge to other ELAC speaker series. Every speaker model in the debut 3.0 line uses the same new 1-inch aluminum dome tweeter, departure from the cloth and silk dome tweeter used in the previous debut 2.0, and debut reference. Those are 3 different speaker lines.
Yeah.
The tweeter is still mounted within the waveguide, but it now appears to have an axial stabilizer in place.
They didn't specifically mention it, but it sure looks like an axial stabilizer, a piece of metal running from top to bottom that just touches the top dome of the tweeter there. So I first really noticed that when Aperion Audio made a big deal about that in their various grand speakers, the first iteration. They had that axial stabilizer on the tweeter, and that's what this looks like anyway. I can't say for 100% sure because ELAC didn't clarify it themselves, but that's what it appears to be.
So all the woofers are made from aramid glass fiber. So fiberglass or whatever. So they appear to be borrowing similar driver design from the debut reference series. There are 5 1/4 woofers or 6.5 woofers, plus a 4-inch woofer for the wedge-shaped model. The ELAC mentions their new internal bracing design and higher sensitivity versus the previous debut 2.0 series, so they should be a little easier to drive, although they still spec 6 ohm impedance and roughly 87 dB sensitivity with 2.83 volts input. Power handling is spec'd at either 120 or 140 watts. So the DB53, DC53, and the DF53 all use the smaller 5 1/4 inch woofers, while the DB63, DC63, and DF63 all use the larger 6.5 inch woofers.
Yes. Look at those model names. D for debut, either B for bookshelf, or C for center, or F for floor stander, the size of the woofer, and then 3 because it's debut 3.0.
I like it.
It's understandable.
The bookshelf models use a single woofer with dual rear flared ports. The centers use two woofers that are sealed, and the floor standards are interestingly listed as having two mid-range drivers and a single woofer, all the same size. Well, we think it might be a misprint because the exploded view clearly shows a separate sealed chamber around a single mid-range driver, while two bass woofers share a dual-ported volume within the speaker cabinet below.
Yeah.
That would be the woofer part.
Yeah. I can't imagine that really is two mid-range drivers. One of them sharing the chamber with the single bass woofer and one of them being sealed in its own little internal enclosure. So I'm pretty sure that was just a misprint.
So the DA43 debut Atmos
4-inch driver
3.0 Series 3.
That's right.
Wedge-shaped speaker is sealed and only rated to handle 80 watts, which is probably 78 more watts than it'll ever get. The cabinets are wrapped in black ash vinyl, and the front baffles have a satin black vinyl finish with no visible holes. The grills are attached magnetically. So what do they cost, and how do their prices compare to the outgoing debut 2.0 series, you might ask?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so pay attention to the second letter and first number,
right,
so that you know which one I'm talking about.
We're doing all the 5-inchers first.
Okay. So the DB53 is $350 a pair compared to the outgoing B5.2, which was $330 a pair, so a whopping $20 difference.
That's right.
The DC53 is $300 each, and the outgoing one was $270. The DF53 was $900 a pair, and the outgoing one is $800 a pair.
Yeah.
So
a little price increases going on here with these. Yeah.
Not much, though. I mean, you could say, "Oh, I don't understand why the other two are only $30," but then the floor stand, a lot more wood.
Yep. Cabinets.
That is the difference.
Yep.
This is the wood. DB63, $450 a pair. The outgoing was $400. The DC63 is $400 each. Outgoing one was $380, only $20 increase there. The DF63, $1,000 a pair, and the outgoing one was $1,060.
Yes, this is the strange one. A little bit tough to figure. Kind of indicates that the woofers are not the expensive part of this speaker. I think everything went into that tweeter. the woofers maybe actually cost less now. That seems to be the indication here.
They got them on clearance.
That's right.
The DA42 is $500 a pair. The A4.2 was $330, but this is a very different design, so I don't know.
Oh, that should be DA43, of course. That's just a typo on my part. I mistyped there, but the old one had sort of a concentric design. The outgoing one, the debut 2.0 one, but they were like different drivers to the entire rest of the series, so they were a little bit of an afterthought, that old debut 2.0 A4.2. So this new one, the DA43, same drivers except it's a 4-inch woofer instead of a 5 1/4 inch, but the same tweeter, and seems pretty clear that tweeter is where all that money is going. So, they got no subwoofer models announced yet, no on-walls or in-walls, because there were debut 2.0 on-walls and in-walls. Nothing announced yet doesn't mean they aren't coming at some point in the future, but there we go. And the debut 2.0s and the debut reference, they're all on sale right now. So if you're waiting for lower prices on the debut 2.0, now might be the time to pounce, because the debut 3.0s are set to arrive in a couple of months.
And honestly, I don't expect them to sound like humongously different. I mean, they might be
a little different because they're like getting away from the Andrew Jones pretty darn linear but slightly rolled off treble frequency sound, and they're like, it's going to sound more like all of our other ELAC speakers. We just that's what they do. That's what they know. That's what they love.
Yeah, I don't know, and we'll see. We'll see what they sound like. So I what I'm saying is, I would have no problems with you saying, if you ask me, should I buy the new ones or wait for buy the old ones that are on sale or wait for the new ones? I'd be like, I'd be okay with buying the old ones. I think it'd be okay. But whatever, we'll find out.
Yeah.
All right. So Microsoft technically announced 3 new Xbox Series X/S models, but they definitely don't get too excited. There's a new white robot X. White robot.
Robot
X
white. It's the shade of white is robot white. Yes.
Was it made by Apple I?
Definitely not. It might have been made by OpenAI, though, because they're their partners.
Robot white Xbox Series X with no disk drive. It looks and performs exactly like the original and current Xbox Series X, except it's white instead of black. It doesn't have a disk drive, and it has 2 terabytes of storage instead of 1 terabyte. For that, you pay $450, which is $50 less than the MSRP of the black Xbox Series X that has a disk drive.
Yeah.
Although those are regularly priced at $450 these days anyway, so it's the same price, whatever.
So you get more storage, but no disk drive.
No disk
and
drive.
It's white instead. Woohoo.
That way they can just take it directly off of your drive.
Yeah.
When they decide that you no longer own the thing that you bought.
Could be.
There's a new robot white... Stupid bug is on my screen. There's a new robot white Xbox Series S with 1 terabyte of storage. It's exactly the same as the black Series S that also has a terabyte of storage, right down to the same $350 price. The original Series S was white and had 512 gigabytes of storage for $300, but this one is basically just a palette swap.
Yeah, that's all it is.
And lastly, there's a Galaxy Black Xbox Series X, which is made by Samsung, in case you're wondering.
It's not, but yeah, they took that name.
They're going to go and run with it. With a disk drive and 2 terabytes of storage instead of 1 terabyte. And for some reason, it costs $600. Guess those little speckles that are supposed to look like stars and the green bottom on the controller really cost a lot extra to make. So those speckles are actually made of the dreams of Apple owners of being ahead of the curve when it comes to technology.
They're like, this is the exact same system. There's no processor bump. There's no GPU bump. This is not an Xbox Series Pro. This is the exact same system. Looks exactly the same, except now it has some speckles on it. They bumped up the amount of internal storage. That's $100 more and $150 more than the street price of the current one. Like I don't know what they're doing. I don't know what they're doing.
Don't worry. They're getting out of the console game. They're trying to wring every last cent they can out of it before they go.
Yeah. This is not the way.
So this is how big can consumer TV screens actually go? Well, if it's up to TCL, we could very well expect 130-inch TVs relatively soon. And if people are willing to pay a substantial premium for it, they have the capability to make a 148-inch TV panel.
Yeah.
It's all thanks to their newest 11G. Well, that's a lot more than 5Gs. Just think of all the
G
mind
in this
control
case
they have near that place.
Stands for generation, which also doesn't really describe what's going on. But when it comes to fabrication facilities for LCD panels, they describe them by generation.
All right. 11G LCD panel factory, which makes mother glass large enough to fit 2 130-inch panels from a single piece or a single 140-inch panel. The sudden rise in availability and drop in prices of 98-inch panels came from being able to cut 2 98-inch panels from a single piece of 8.5G. I guess that's a generation too?
Generation, yes.
Mother glass with virtually no waste pieces. 130-inch panels would actually be a similar situation on 11G pieces of mother glass. The current 115-inch panels leave a fair amount of waste material, so there's a chance 130-inch TVs might be priced similarly to the 115-inchers. A single 148-inch panel is as large as they can physically go. Excuse me, but you'd only get one of those panels from an 11G piece of mother glass. Hopefully the waste area could still be used to make additional smaller panels, a bunch of iPads. But the price of the 148-inch would certainly be much, much higher. So, I guess.
It's just interesting.
Bigger doors. People need bigger doors.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, because this is not a projection screen that you can roll up and bring in anywhere. This is not a modular display that you can disassemble and reassemble inside. This is a single gigantic thing. I mean, that might be the reason that they stopped at 115 for now to begin with.
The funny thing is that you could probably use whatever mounting hardware and mount that you have for your plasma TV, and it will hold it.
Right. But like the 115 inches, they're coming in at about $20,000 right now. Not inexpensive, but like if you could get a 130 inch for $25,000, which seems actually quite plausible given the total lack of waste material.
So much better than the projector screen. So much better. 130 inch. All these people are like,
well, you're never going to be able to get the.
Yeah, you want to get something that's even close in performance. You're looking at a $20,000 projector.
Absolutely,
anyways.
yes.
And it's still not as good.
Definitely not as bright. Definitely not hitting 1,000 nits full screen. So yeah.
Oh man, can you imagine? My wife already hates me over this 83-inch TV we've got. She's still giving me the side eye about
I don't think you're doing $25,000 for a TV, Tom. Not anytime soon.
Can you imagine me trying to convince her that we need a 130-inch screen?
That's right.
Sasi, this is comments from our listeners. Sasi, appreciate her feedback on a subwoofer selections spreadsheet tool. So we made a bunch of changes that we suggested, and we will link to his latest version in our show notes. Check it out. He'd be happy to hear any feedback from AVRant listening audience. So send it all in to question@avrant.com, and we will talk about it.
That's right.
But still from Sasi, but on a different topic. Here was talking about Steven's 2-channel setup, on which his pre-pro doesn't have any base management. So Steven was asking us about the best method for integrating his single SB3000 subwoofer while his new Focal tower speakers are running full range. Rob suggested a miniDSP 2x4 HD so Steven could create his own crossover and base management, and Sasi fully agrees that would be likely to be the most cost-effective way to go. But Rob also mentioned how he wondered if Steven would balk at the idea since he probably uses balanced XLR connections, and the miniDSP 2x4 HD only has unbalanced RCA ins and outs. So Sasi wanted to suggest the miniDSP Flex. It's similar to the 2x4 HD, but it can be outfitted with balanced connections, and also claims a higher signal-to-noise ratio and uses more expensive DACs than the 2x4 HD.
Yeah.
More things that don't actually make an
I know, but when you're talking to the audiophile audience.
I know.
Yeah.
Costs more, because of course it does.
Sure.
$495 to start, and then the balance ins and outs are a $75 upgrade. The balance connections are in the form of TRS jacks, so miniDSP also sells the appropriate TRS to XLR cables, and you have the option of adding a 2-channel Dirac Live full for another $200 if you want. So the price can climb fairly quickly, which is what audiophiles love.
Yes.
But given Steven's other equipment, he might still consider this a lower cost solution.
Yeah. So actually, I wasn't familiar that I was aware that the Flex existed, but I didn't know about the balanced options and all that. So that's good to have in the back pocket there. It starts getting a little pricey, starts getting a little up there, but yeah, good to know that that is an option. Thank you.
I would buy XLR to RCA cables in a second and just go with that.
For the 2x4 HD, I know. It would function.
In a second. I've used them. They sound fine.
You can keep it balanced this way.
Sasi also noticed that Steven has a Weem Pro as one of his sources. The Weem Ultra is coming out soon for $330 and has base management and 10-band parametric EQ built in. So that might be an option, although it wouldn't provide any base management for Steven's turntable, of course. So,
that's right. So some great comments there from Sasi. Appreciate it. Thank you,
Sasi.
Yeah.
Andrew heard Mike last week asking about a way to send both HDMI signals and an internet signal over a single pre-run Ethernet cable. Rob suggested the potential of HDMI over IP converter that can be used with regular network switches if Mike was willing to pay the $1,700 price.
Yeah.
Andrew works in professional AV installation, so he knew of another solution. It's still rather expensive at $1,332 from B&H Photo, for example.
Yes.
But Atlona has an HDBaseT system that lets you plug in both HDMI and network Ethernet cables on either end and send both those signals over a single Ethernet cable between them.
Yeah.
So that's cheaper.
It is.
It's still expensive.
Yes.
But it's cheaper. He's had good experience with it firsthand. So if that's really the way Mike wants to solve his issue, the Atlona solution would save him a few $100s. So that is a non-trivial amount of money that you're saving, but it's still an expensive solution.
Much more expensive than the hassle of just pulling one more Ethernet cable through the conduit that he does have in his wall. I think that time and effort is worth more than the either $1,300 or $1,700 in my opinion, but
my solution was to cut the end of the HDMI cable and and tape another Ethernet cable to the end of that, and then just yank it through real fast. Well, that cable cost me $50. I'm sorry, your other solution is $1,332.
Yeah. But that's good. I wasn't aware of that particular one, so there you go. That is $400 or so cheaper.
Infinite Gary, we said not to use power saving on this new LG G3 OLED, and Rob said to just lower the OLED light setting because setting it for actually 100 nick peaks is like 12 or something. So it's okay to set that light level setting really low. So before his professional calibrator arrived, Gary tried to set the setting of 12, not 2. And he did think it looked better to him. Then his calibrator arrived and they discovered 100 nick peaks actually measured accurately with an OLED light set to 6.
Yes.
Can you imagine? Can you imagine?
That's out of 100, by the way. The scale goes up to 100.
Buying a OLED and just being like...
Yep. G3 in particular.
Just lower that down.
All the marketing is, it's the brightest OLED ever. And Gary's like, nope.
Nope. Can you
But hey, he didn't have to set it to 0.
It's like living in at the end of Florida. What's that little island called where Hemingway died or whatever it was? You know, the southernmost point in the United States, where the island is like, I don't know, 4 miles around or something like that, and buying a Lamborghini and just puttering around this thing.
Keep it in first gear and never get out of first gear.
Just revving it the whole way. Gary still doesn't think it looks that dim at all, so he's finally happy with his G3 OLED and his micro lens array panel.
That's right.
Wow.
He still has room to go lower. If it's still too bright, he can go lower.
Technically 5.
That's right.
5 lower, and then it's to 1.
It's great.
And then that's off.
That's it.
That.
I like it.
In his defense,
yes,
the half-life on that panel is significantly longer than the half-life on your panel that's set at 90 or 100.
That's right. He's got headroom to spare.
He's got headroom. He doesn't use a stand for it. He puts it on top of one of those massive Marty subs.
Why you get kilowatt amps for your clip speakers. Same idea.
Crown 1,000 watt bridged crown amplifiers for your clip speakers. Philharmonic speakers.
Look how low I can turn them down. It's amazing.
I know. It's amazing. My dead receiver doesn't get hot, it gets cold.
Right, yeah. That would be good.
Mase or Mase?
I believe it's Mase, because he shortened it. It's a shortened version of his last name, but that's what he goes by, so that's what we'll say.
That's what we'll call him.
Yeah.
Mase has installed tactile transducer in his home theater, so he thought he was already familiar with what it was like to have seats that physically move along with the movie. But he recently tried DBOX for the first time when he went to a movie theater to see Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. It was a bit of a... First of all, can we just stop for a second and acknowledge that the Planet of the Apes movies, ever since that Marky Mark one, which sucked. Well, it wasn't terrible, but it was okay, just okay. I liked it. It was fine. It just compared to the rest, they have been so good.
Yes.
What other series of movies can you point at has been that consistently good? And nobody's like, it's not like a cultural thing like Star Wars and Star Trek, which, I mean, come on, every other Star Trek movie sucks. I mean, it does. All the even numbers are not good, or odd numbers are not good. The even numbers are good.
Pleasantly surprised when they finally see the modern Planet of the Apes movies. They're like, hey,
these
things
are
really good. Yeah.
Every single one of them is
I haven't seen Kingdom yet, though, so I don't know.
I haven't either.
Yeah.
But it's already reported to be, like, all the people I know of that review things are like, yeah, it's just as good as the rest of them.
Fantastic. Hooray. Glad to hear it.
Maybe if we started paying attention to them, they'd start sucking like the Jurassic Park has got way more of a following than this, and those movies haven't been good since literally the first one.
Pretty much.
He recently tried DBOX for the first time we went to see him, blah, blah, blah. It was a bit of a surprise to him with the seats moving around so much on all 3 axes, but it just felt a bit off. The seats felt considerably higher and harder than usual, so he sort of wished there were footrest or something so that he could plant his feet. He's glad to have had the experience, but it isn't something he'd ever pay so much extra for again. He just wanted to check with us, is that just the typical DBOX experience, or did he maybe happen to go to a theater where DBOX systems and seats weren't quite set up perfectly or right at all? He just wants to make sure he actually gave it a fair shot before writing it off. And is there any other similar system that might be worth a try? I have not tried DBOX since literally I was at a home theater place, like a high-end place that had a bunch of 2-channel stuff, and they had one theater room that had the full seats and that were calibrated to the movie that you were watching. So you had to upload like DBOX like that. You have to upload like the special, track or whatever. Just
DBOX file. It's like a soundtrack. It's like a separate soundtrack.
Yeah.
But it's motion information. Yeah.
Yeah, so that it moves at the right time. And I tried it and went, this sucks.
Okay.
And I never gave it another shot because I'm certainly not going to pay extra because I don't go to the movies by myself. I go to the movies with 4 other freaking people and it costs $1 million.
Yeah.
I'm not spending $20 extra a person to sit on a stupid seat that nobody's going to like. So, or that I don't like, and I'm sure they're not going to like it. So, but it might keep my wife awake. Maybe I should think about it. So, but Rob's tried it. So, what do you think?
Yeah, I get DBOX seats quite often when I go. Mainly, and I'm being honest here, my main reason for doing it is because they give you 2 separate armrests. There are no shared armrests on DBOX seats.
Yeah,
that alone is almost enough for it. Plus, they're almost always right at the 1/3 from the back of the theater location, the very prime seats. Those are almost always the DBOX seats, at least in the theaters around here. So, because it is my preferred seating location and because I get the 2 armrests, that's my main reason for doing it. All the DBOX theaters I've ever been to, they give you the ability to turn up or down the severity of the movement.
Sure.
And I typically have it on the lowest setting. You can turn it off, but I feel like that's really a waste for me to have spent the extra money. But I typically have it on the 1. There's usually 3, 1, 2, 3, and off. So I usually have it on the 1 setting. It is absolutely typical that the seats are harder than the other seats, and that they do feel higher up off the ground, at least at first, because they have to have the available range of motion to tilt you forward, and they quite often do. So they give you that extra height on the seat as well. So all of that sounds typical. I don't think that you somehow gave it an unfair shot, other than maybe you didn't try lower or higher levels of the motion, and you might have found a setting that was a bit more to your liking. But I will absolutely say I would expect this to happen in Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes as well, because I'm pretty sure they're still riding horses in that movie, and the horsey bouncing that they cannot get away from. They love the horsey bouncing movement. Anytime there are characters riding horses on screen, they have those DBOX seats trying to mimic the feeling of bouncing up and down on a horse. It is the stupidest thing.
Why?
It is so dumb, and they do it every time. They love it at DBOX, and it is ridiculous.
I'm just going to tell you right now, there is no world in which I get back onto a DBOX seat purposefully.
And
if
you didn't love it and you're like, it was a lot of extra money, because it is, especially if you go with more than one person, and the whole 2 armrests and prime seating location is enough, like, there's absolutely no reason for you to force yourself to do it again. I think you gave it a perfectly fair shot.
So a couple of scenes during the movie faded to a full white screen, and when that happened, he noticed what looked like seams in the projection screen as though it were patched together. It no longer looked like a single solid screen. Is that normal?
Yep. Sure is.
I don't know where the loom is where you put out like a IMAX screen, but I don't think it really exists. You have to, and that's why people are like, I cannot tell you how appalled I am to realize how dirty my projection screen must be in here.
Yeah,
because every time I set up for the podcast in my home theater, I have these lights so you can see me on the YouTube, which you should not go to because I look terrible. But also, you get to see this mic, so maybe you will go. The problem is that I put a light right in front of the new OLED, and the big dog comes in here to shake. Like whenever he's got something on his face, he's like, I can't do it out there. Might get it on something. I'm gonna come in here and get it all over the OLED. Right. So every time I start this podcast, I have to go up there and clean the screen because I can see it very clearly, but you cannot see it on the white screen unless it's egregious.
Yeah.
Which is, I guess, a feature, but at the same time, I can't imagine how dirty that thing is back there. And what you're describing is exactly what we talk about all the time in this podcast, which there are things that are visible / audible and things that aren't. And you may know that they exist in that I know my projection screen is dirty, but I may not be able to see it, in which case, who cares?
Sure.
And you're describing exactly that. You're like, oh, well, it's a full white screen, I can see seams.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the large movie theater screens, they are more than one piece of fabric, and they stitch them together. And that is how they make that size. And actually, this is a byproduct of theaters have been getting brighter. They used to be traditionally much, much dimmer than they are now. Theaters are getting brighter, and that makes the seams more visible when you go to a full white screen now.
Sasi and Stan. Over at Audioholics, James Larson wrote his review of the SVS Ultra Evolution Pinnacle floor standing speakers, and then Gina and James discussed that review on their YouTube channel. And there's a bunch of pictures here, whatever. Sasi keyed on James' comments about the curved front baffle and SVS's claims about acoustical time alignment. As far as Sasi could tell, James' assessment echoed our own, saying that it didn't do much harm, or any harm. But as far as you can discern, both through the measurements and through listening, didn't provide any particular benefit either. Just gives the speakers a more interesting industrial design. Or as I said it, they look as good as they sound.
Sure.
Finally, because the Ultra speakers were just boxes, and these are curves, which are a little bit cooler. So there you go. Gene says he believes that driver time alignment, whether through physical positioning or through electrical designing in the crossover, can provide some benefits, but he and James didn't go deep into it and more or less agreed to disagree. But all of that said, James did mention that grouping the two mid-range drivers above and below the tweeter and angling them did seem to allow their sound to sum together at a closer distance, meaning that despite the physical size of the Ultra Evolution Pinnacle floor standers, you could actually sit quite close to them. And the low crossover point between the tweeter and the mid-range drivers helped them achieve wide and also fairly tall dispersion, although his measurements indicated that some off-axis cancellation right at the crossover point. So all in all, what do we think of James's review, his comments about these specific topics, and Gene's mild disagreement about dismissing the driver time alignment claims? So I have experienced floor standing speakers that had a hard time resolving at a very close distance or a closer distance.
Yep.
That's I have
not uncommon at all.
Yeah, in multiple rooms. And I felt like the bookshelf speakers that I had were better. If you read the review of my review, it is that they had better off-axis response compared to mine, and they resolved better. So I don't necessarily disagree with what James has said here.
Like, it doesn't sound like it's way out to lunch or something like that from your experience. Yeah.
No, and not only that, I don't know that. See, one of the big problems reviewers have, and in fact people in general have, is they are told that there's a difference, or they see a difference, or they think that there's a difference, and they attribute any benefits or drawbacks to that difference.
Sure.
I have no idea why the Evolution speakers seemed to sound better in my room, as far as off-axis and resolving a little bit better. I can't attribute that to any one thing because I don't know what caused it. James is making some claims based on the fact that these things look different. That's fine. He may be right.
I mean, I don't know. He also did extensive measurements, and I do trust James in his measurements. So yeah, there's some to back it up. Although, I mean, and James said this too. This isn't me just making this up. But anything to do with speaker design, like if you have that lower crossover point between the tweeter and the mid-range drivers, and the tweeter is capable of keeping up, like able to keep up the dynamics, it's able to keep up the headroom, it's able to handle that lower crossover frequency without any deleterious effects, that tends to result in wider dispersion because you're using a much smaller surface area, you're using a much smaller diameter driver to play a lower frequency that pretty much automatically gives you wider dispersion in both axes.
Right.
So I would probably attribute more to that. Yeah.
Well, yeah, but the tower speakers I was talking about that were having a hard time resolving at close distance was the Veris Grand, and those in particular were marketed and measured as having a much lower crossover point.
Yeah, for the tweeter.
So it's not necessarily a given,
right?
It's not like you have a aluminum driver, it's going to be this, or you have a larger woofer, you're going to hear that. It's not going to, you can't just look at one aspect and say, oh, well, this is probably what caused it. It's going to be a multiple. These things are very complex. It's going to be a multiple effect.
It is a system for sure. But as far as the time alignment thing goes, like where it logically makes sense that some level of paying attention to the time alignment between drivers would logically be beneficial. I mean, it really is only at the in common frequencies, right? So there are frequencies that definitely the tweeter and the mid-range driver, they are both playing. When those frequencies appear in the signal, both sets of drivers do play them because it's in that crossover region. The normal logical reason why you would pay some amount of attention to time alignment, that might not necessarily be simultaneous time alignment. It might be aligning the drivers to play in a certain way, like the mid-range drivers move at this moment and the tweeter moves at this moment. And you can do that either physically or you can do that electronically or you can do it both. You can have both things working that way, but it's to control the moment at which the mid-range driver versus moves relative to the moment of the tweeter. You would normally do that to avoid the measured cancellations that James found right at that crossover region, right at that 1.8 kilohertz where they spec the tweeter crossing over to mid-range driver. Off axis, he was like, yeah, there's actually a little bit of hinkiness there right at that crossover region. And you would think that the whole reason for paying attention to time alignment would actually be to eliminate that off-axis bumpiness dip that they're showing right at that crossover point, because normally we want the off-axis dispersion to look as close to the on-axis dispersion as we can get it, and that isn't happening here. So if anything, they might have needed to adjust the, tweak the crossover a little bit. I mean, none of us really has a problem with them physically arranging the drivers however they want to. All the AES papers say, yeah, do what you want there, but in the crossover, regardless of how you arrayed them physically, you'll have to pay some attention to make sure you don't end up with cancellations like this. So who knows? Maybe there'll be a running order change or a version, 0.5 or whatever, where they tweak the crossover a little, because there's no reason why you can't.
Yeah, so, like I said, I think, and I did not hear the podcast or watch the video.
I mean, the main thing James said is that for the towers, this is the pinnacle towers, right? So we wouldn't expect this to be true of the bookshelf speakers that Tom reviewed. But for the largest ones with the 4 8-inch woofers, he was like, yeah, when he measured them, the frequency response was a little bit tipped up in the bass. It just anechoically, they had a little bit of a gradual rise towards the bass end of things. And he's like, it wasn't egregious enough that if you want a perfectly flat response, it would be easy to obtain with any EQ system. So it's not like they did something that would be difficult to correct in any way. But if you aren't applying any EQ, you can expect these to sound a bit warmer, to sound a bit fuller in the bass by default. And he's like, yeah, many people will like that. And if you want perfectly flat, you'll have to apply a little EQ to it. That was the other takeaway.
So as far as Gene's disagreement about the driver time alignment stuff, Gene's always been more numbers oriented, if that makes sense. So, him looking at the technology and saying, hey, this should make a difference is not implausible to me. That's where he came from. I would be surprised. Again, it's already been shown in tests that it doesn't make an audible difference, enough of an audible difference for people to be able to pick it out. Yeah. In a blind test or even a non-blind test.
You certainly could intentionally rotate the electronic phase of the mid-range driver relative to the tweeter so badly that on axis there's a cancellation. Like that would be a obvious example of if you really paid zero attention to time alignment, you could mess up a speaker. So certainly I agree on that end of things. Yeah, there's some attention has to be paid. Yeah,
but that could be paid in a number of different ways, and physically realigning the driver. So certainly not the most cost-effective way to do it. When you could just do it in the crossover.
Yeah, when you can build a flat front baffle, that will cost less.
Listen, I continue to believe that SVS needed to increase the price of their speakers because everything was becoming more expensive. And they're like, if we're going to do this, because we need to do it anyways, let's go ahead and make some changes so that people know that they're getting something different for their money than what they were getting before. I have no problems with any of that. No. The problem I have is this, this is what I wish SVS would have said. We physically time aligned the drivers.
Sure.
And no claims of anything else. Nothing else. If they said, does that make it sound better? Well, we're going to let you decide.
Sure.
But they are the center mass of each of the drivers, is all physically aligned now, and many people believe that makes them that's important. If they had just said like non-committal stuff like that, that would have been better on this.
Yeah,
but that's
the marketing language, not the engineering. Yeah. So.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And the marketing people cannot help themselves. They cannot do it. They can. It's just like last week we were talking about the MIT thing, right? The people who wrote that article and made that graphic about the screen, the curtain. They didn't care about the science behind it. They didn't care anything about it. They're just like, what will get the clicks? What will make people care about this?
And when they do have the quotes from the researchers that none of it was weird claims on their part, they're like, here was an interesting study. We tried to build the thing, and here were our results. And I'm like, yep,
yes,
and that's valuable. That's great, and I'm glad they did it.
So Stan also saw James's review, and he keyed in on James's fairly adamant recommendation that the Ultra Evolution Pinnacle floor standards be run full range with no high-pass crossover to a subwoofer applied. Well, there's a problem. There were aspects we might expect, such as the port tuning appearing to be at 30 Hz, the strong extension, the high output capabilities on the 30 Hz anechoically, and lower when placed in a room, provides you supply enough amplifier power and can contend with an impedance drop to about 2.5 ohms at 80 Hz. Lovely.
I know.
The presence of 4 8-inch bass woofers and the spacing of those 4 drivers, front and back, top and bottom, that did seem to help with placement flexibility in a room. But most of James's insistence seemed to come from the chosen crossover point and filtering applied between the low end of the mid-range drivers and the upper end of those 4 bass woofers. And there's a bunch of, if you're on YouTube or Flickr, there's a bunch of graphs.
Yeah.
He noted how the bass woofers have a very limited bandwidth and how all of the filtering centers right around 80 Hz. So he was concerned that cascading even more filtering by using the typical 80 Hz crossover to your subwoofers would create a situation where it was more difficult than usual to achieve a good blend, and that you really would be almost wasting. Oh my God.
No, okay, I don't want to. I put that word in his mouth, but
okay,
yeah, I don't want to say
wasting those 4 8-inch woofers because they're barely being used above 80 Hz as it is. James and Gene both acknowledge that they typically recommend sending any speaker to small and using bass management to reroute the bass to multiple well-positioned subwoofers, just like we always say here on this podcast. But they think these speakers are an exception, that they should be run full range with additional subwoofers only used to help with any remaining room modes or to extend even lower than the Pinnacle speakers can reach themselves. Do we agree with this being an exception? Guess. Just guess, what I'm going to say. Are there any other instances where we would recommend running speakers full range even if you also have subwoofers? Only time I would recommend running your speakers full range is if you do not have subwoofers.
Okay.
Because you have no option but to do that.
And I mean, I would make the exception for, because there are a small number of speakers, many of them actually having self-powered bass drivers, which is no means a guarantee that they're able to do this, but there are some that truly the speaker can play right down to 20 Hz very linearly, and I don't have a problem with having 2 of those at the front of the room and then 2 subwoofers that match those capabilities at the back of the room. And essentially having a 4 subwoofer setup that are, positioned equally to those.
That is, I will agree with that.
Sure. Yeah. But those are basically the exception. This one, it's still room dependent. It still depends on the room what the response out of each of these Ultra Evolution Pinnacle Tower speakers is actually going to be. I am still going to play a bass sweep through just the front left speaker all by itself. I'm going to sit in all 3 seats of my 3-seater couch and listen to that bass sweep. And wherever that bass sweep starts to sound uneven, or I start to notice a very obvious dip or an egregious hump, wherever that is, I'm going to set the crossover frequency. I'm going to set those speakers to small, and I'm going to set the crossover frequency higher than wherever that unevenness in the bass happens. And that is not up to the speaker. That is up to the room. It's entirely up to the room and the placement of the speaker in that room and the placement of my seats relative to that speaker in that room. And it's not going to matter. I don't care what the speaker can play. Anechoically, the speaker can play perfectly flat down to 20 Hz, but that speaker is not going to remain linear in its response. It's going to have peaks and dips because of the interaction with the room. So even with these speakers, like I gather where James is coming from, but I still disagree with it.
I don't. The idea that there's a crossover happening within the speaker and that you need to be careful about adding another crossover to that is, I think, is just not scientific.
Because it's the incoming signal. All of that filtering is happening before the signal ever enters the speaker.
So the speaker itself has got crossovers going on all over the place between the tweeter and the mid-range, and the woofers, and maybe between some of the bass drivers. There could be like multiple bass drivers holding different things
too, right? So the port is involved in
the port
there too.
as well. Yeah. So all these crossovers things are happening here, but we're going to care about this one just because it happens to be centered on the same thing. I mean, the speaker doesn't care. The speaker itself is getting the frequency and being told to play it at a certain volume.
Yeah, that's right.
The crossovers inside are meant to make sure that when you say play it at this volume, it plays it at that volume through whichever drivers within the speaker it's supposed to be using.
Yeah, because if I have my master volume set to full, 0 dB, and it says, hey, play 70 hertz at 100 decibels right now. That's what the signal called for. But then I turn my master volume down to -20, and now that very same signal is telling it to play 70 hertz at 80 decibels instead of 100 decibels. Right. You're telling me that somehow messed up the response of the speaker? No, of course it didn't. And that's all the bass management filter is doing, is just telling you to play the same sounds, but quieter. Yeah. There's no reason that the speaker can't do that.
Yeah, I don't think this argument holds water. I don't really understand.
That one doesn't.
I don't really
make sense.
I don't understand how that makes sense. Now, again, it's very hard whenever when you read a review, no matter who's doing the review or how scientific or subjective they're being, it makes no difference. You really need to know where, what their room looks like and how they have things set up and how it translates into your space. Mm-hmm. So if your space looks like their space, you can take their review, subjective or objective, and say, oh, this applies to me more than other reviews that might be done in a completely different space. It's not like your room at all. So if their system is like your system, if their room is like your room, and on this podcast, if you're following our advice, all of our rooms are like all of our rooms because we've got doors. They're rectangular-esque. They've got multiple subwoofers, and they're set up properly. Essentially, the speakers are set up properly. Mm-hmm. And that makes things translate very well from our recommendations to your room. It's when somebody comes here without that, without a properly treated room and a door and a bunch of other stuff, they're like, oh, I took your recommendations and it sucks. Well, our recommendations don't suck. Your room sucks. Back to Sasi, who also watched Andrew Robertson's review of the new Emotiva XT2 tower speakers and the XC2 center. Andrew gave some warnings about the narrow dispersion of these speakers, which wasn't necessarily a surprise given their folded ribbon tweeters, and also they have a fairly high crossover frequency to the 6.5-inch mid-range driver. But the thing that Andrew really keyed in on, and the topic that Sasi wants to ask us about, was how difficult they were to drive. Andrew says that he started out with just 3 Emotiva speakers connected to a Sony 5000 ES receiver. The room in which Andrew does his reviews is quite large, open, and moderately acoustically treated, and he's running these speakers full range just to hear what they could do on their own. Again, something we don't recommend here, but whatever. He said that not only did the speakers immediately sound like they were straining the Sony receiver, but that Sony also got extremely hot within just a few minutes of starting an action scene in a movie, and he quickly shut things down for free going the thermal protection. Let me see if I've got this right. A company that sells amps.
Well, yeah, that's coming up.
Made a speaker that needs an amp. I'm trying to contain my shock, in case you're wondering. He noted the same Sony receiver had no problems powering the SVS Ultra Evolution Titan floor standers or the KEF R11 Meta towers in the same room with the similar content. He reached out to Emotiva to find out if he had somehow connected something wrong. No, yeah, you forgot to put an amplifier in between. Or maybe they just received a malfunctioning set of speakers to test. Andrew reported that Emotiva told him they designed these new speakers in-house, always using their own XPA amps, that they were really 4 ohm speakers as spec'd, and they didn't recommend it with anything less than 100 watts per channel. Since he had an Emotiva amplifier and other separate amplifiers on hand, Andrew used those for the rest of his review period and didn't run into any further problems. Mm-hmm. But that led him to conclude that these really are power-hungry speakers, that even a higher-end receiver model like the Sony 5000 ES, is that a higher end?
It's up there. There's only the 7000 above it.
Can't really handle, at least in a larger room size like his. So Sasi finds all this to be a bit difficult to believe. The new Emotiva speakers are quite budget-friendly, and their own spec sheets say they are safe to connect to an 8-ohm rated amplifier. You can connect anything to anything. Just don't play it very loud. They claim fairly high efficiency, with which Andrew also pointed out, but said they came with a bunch of caveats that he explained. So would Emotiva really kneecap their own speakers so they only work well in separate amps that they also happen to sell? To Sasi, that seems like a poor business decision. So could this be a case of trying to appeal to the audiophile review crowd by saying these speakers only sound best when connected to separates? I mean, no. So most rooms, I mean, I think there's only really two types of home theaters in most of, or home theater spaces in most houses. There is the, I connected some speakers to my TV in my open concept living room and it's massive. Or I repurposed a small bedroom and or a small room off the side.
And I don't mind Andrew testing it in the situation that he does one bit, because like it doesn't really make sense to me to be testing high wattage amplifiers in a converted bedroom with the door closed. It's like you're never going to possibly detect any like anything that could be going wrong, because your ears will give out before the system gets anywhere close. So like doing his testing in a room that taxes the audio equipment a little bit for testing purposes makes all the sense in the world to me. It's like he was able to detect, he's like, it's a little unusual, maybe to the point that he was wondering if he did something wrong, but he's like, now that receiver got really hot just powering 3 speakers, granted full range, granted in an open room, but it had powered like speakers that claim similar output capabilities. He's like, this receiver had powered those speakers just fine. So he was like, did I do something wrong? But Emotiva was like, well, we only ever designed these speakers in-house with our own XPA amplifiers, hundreds and hundreds of watts on tap, easily powering 4 ohm loads. And he did mention like measured the ohmage dips down to like 2.3 at one point. So that's getting pretty low.
Down there.
Yeah, so I don't think Andrew did anything wrong. I don't think Andrew was just trying to appeal to an audiophile crowd, because I mean he was quite adamant. He's like, this is unusual. It's unusual, particularly for speakers of this price, to like be this taxing of a AV receiver. He wasn't like praising that. He was warning people and basically being like, one of the reasons the speakers cost less is to like leave you enough in your budget to get some XPA amplifiers along with them.
I mean, you don't need to get Emotiva's amplifiers. You can get whatever amplifiers you want.
Monolith amplifiers would do absolutely just fine, yes.
And again, there's going to be a large swath of the community who would buy these things and put them onto connect them directly to their receiver and have no problems because their rooms,
because they're in a much smaller room. That's right. Or and they're base managing them, right? Yeah, they're not having the towers play full range.
You put those two things together, and you end up with a speaker that probably would be just fine. Maybe even in Andrew's room if you add subwoofers in.
Right. Possibly.
Maybe.
I bet that receiver would still get pretty warm.
I think it probably would too. There is very little motivation for Emotiva to care, and it's not like they're not spec'd, to what they actually are.
He also mentioned, when he called them, I don't know whether they were aware that it was, because he's a pretty well-known reviewer, Andrew Robinson, but I whether they were aware it was him they were talking to, or if he just did it sort of incognito. But it's like, their suggestion was, oh yeah, you're using an AV receiver. That AV receiver has pre-outs. You know what you should do is you should connect some of our own Emotiva. I'm like, so is that a bad business decision? I don't think it is. It's like, I don't see it being so. It's getting that customer service call. It's allowing them the opportunity to upsell you on not just their speakers, but the amplifiers that they also make. So yeah, I don't think it's a calculated risk. Are you going to tick some people off? Sure. But you're also going to get a whole bunch of people who were already ready to be an Emotiva fan and like, ooh, I have an excuse to buy an expensive, gigantic amplifier.
How many people that listen to this podcast write in just
That's right.
dreaming that we will say yes to amplifiers?
Let me justify buying a separate amplifier. Here you go. Here it is.
So yes. I mean, I have, and this is not unique. I know it sounds like this is a little unique. It is not. I have reviewed many speakers that are what I would consider to be budget speakers, even, where you're like, man, this thing needs an amp.
Yep.
This thing is hot.
Yep.
This is to really power something, to give this the power that it needs to sound good in my space. You need an amplifier for this this speaker, and that's not super unusual. Andrew might have found it a little unusual, but if somebody sent me a 4 ohm speaker, tower speaker, and I ran it full range, and it got hot in a large room, I wouldn't have called the company. I would just been like, I just would have put it as part of the review, exactly the same way he did, except without all the hemming and hawing about how how it was unexpected. I'd be like, yeah, that's exactly what I expect.
I don't begrudge him calling the company and double checking. That's great. No. That's good for a reviewer to do. So yeah, I find Andrew very blameless in all of this, honestly. So yeah, and
I do too. Shocking. I mean, the other side of it could have been the way it could have worked out is if I had done it my way, which is just like, this thing needs an amp. The company very well could have come back and said, listen, we must have sent you a bad pair because they don't need amps.
Yeah.
You should be able. It shouldn't have got that receiver hot at all. You must have wired it wrong or something like that. Yeah. You'd be surprised what some of these companies say. Ilango appreciated discussion about his basement renovation that started earlier than planned and his plans for laying out future home theater area. Rob suggested that even though the ceiling joists are closer together than usual at 12 inches on center, there could be some solutions for soundproof backer boxes with in-ceiling speakers for the overheads. He went ahead and bought a DynaBox to test how well it might work for him, and the Sonance Mag 6 or Mag 8 speakers could definitely work for him if the DynaBox works out. So after advice, he feels pretty good about planning his distances for his seats and speakers, but for overhead speakers, if he ends up using in-ceilings, how wide apart should they be exactly? The Dolby diagrams all still show them being the same distance apart as the front left and right speakers, but that might put them a little closer to the side walls than he would like. So is that a strict requirement? Is there acceptable range? How does he determine exactly where they should be installed? There is, I actually wrote... I think the Dolby diagrams. We talked about this.
Yeah. Dolby has a white paper for Dolby Atmos home installations. It's quite a long document, honestly, and maybe overlooking the one mention of the range for width between overhead speakers would be very easy to do, or you might have never looked at this white paper document at all, so I'll have the link for that specifically. But yeah, they do have a range. They give a range. They actually updated this from the original ranges that they gave. They for the overhead speakers, as far as how far apart the left and right overhead speakers of any given pair are. They don't do it by angles. They do still show all the diagrams where they're the exact same width apart as your front left and right speakers. All the diagrams still do look like that, but they do write up that for the overhead speakers, they want you to take the width of your room, and then half of that width is the narrowest together they would have it be. So if your room is 12 feet wide, then they wouldn't have them any closer together than 6 feet apart. And that's tweeter to tweeter. They're always talking tweeter to tweeter. But they wouldn't have them any, closer together than half the width of your room up to 0.7 of the width of your room is the widest apart that they would have them. It's pretty close to being 3/4, but they say 0.5 to 0.7 of the width of your room is the range that they would give for the width between the tweeters of your left and right overhead speakers. So that's the Dolby arrangement. That might be narrower together than your front left and right speakers. It might be wider apart. So the last bit of advice that I always give that Dolby doesn't specify is, look, if you have some seats that are like right up against a side wall, forget about those. Those aren't ever going to be primary seats. But, if you've got a 3-seater couch or a 4-seater couch, something like that, that's your primary seating area. Those left and right seats might actually get used fairly regularly. To me, the only logical thing is for any speaker that is called a left speaker to be at least slightly to the left of that couch, and for anything that is called a right speaker to be at least slightly to the right of that couch, so that you don't have the weird situation of a speaker that's a sound that's supposed to be coming out of a left speaker is emanating from the right of an audience member. Right? Yeah. Again, if you got somebody who's pushed right up against the sidewall, forget it. That's going to happen. But if we're talking like a 3-seater couch or a 4-seater couch, I want all the speakers that are left speakers to be at least like in line with the left armrest or a little wider. So that should be doable within Dolby's ranges as well. And I just wouldn't have any left speakers physically to the right of a primary seat.
So I have an article called Dolby Update Speaker Placement Guidelines, but we get no credit because I had already written an article about how all their guidelines are stupid and wrong. Not all, but that many of the things that their diagrams show are wrong. And what I said is the new guide is particularly effective for enthusiasts who have their front sound stages widely separated. If your front speakers are widely separated, you can just take the width of the room or system and use their metric rather than making your overheads wide as well, which is putting them in line with your speaker.
Sure.
Our suggestion has always been that just have them a little wider than your couch.
Yeah.
It's just what I said in this. I just read it to you. But there's more in there. So if you're looking for more of a breakdown, plus it links back to this same document that Rob's linking here. It's all there. But yeah, people get crazy.
Well, no, I mean, he's just trying to run the wires before the drywall goes up, so that's fair enough. He wants to figure out where it goes.
And I agree with you completely. Yes. And the hard part with this is that you have everything open right now.
Yeah.
But what makes sense when the room is empty and there's no drywall isn't necessarily going to make sense when you get everything set up. And you know the drywall's in, those speaker wires hanging down, and you place the couch, and you realize, oh, the door opens in this way. I need to move everything over a foot.
Yeah, and
now nothing's where it should be. So you're gonna have to give yourself a little bit of grace here, my man. I mean, really, you know, and if you can, give yourself some options. You know what I mean? It's going to be hard. Carlton sent more of a rant. He called himself out. He called it that himself.
He called it a rant himself in his email.
Yeah. Okay, whatever. But maybe here's something we can suggest. Maybe there is something we can suggest to help him out. His frustration led to him finding my Why Won't Your Zone 2 Speakers Work article in AV Gadget, but he still finds himself in a bind.
Mm-hmm.
So he uses a Control 4 system to control his whole house, including his home theater. He specifically bought a Denon X3800H for its Zone 2 capabilities. Technically, it functions, but it's a pain. The main thing he wanted was to be able to leave his sources outputting surround sound or immersive audio, but then have that multi-channel audio automatically downmix to 2 channels so he could also be played in Zone 2. Mm-hmm. Nope.
Well...
But as we are well aware, many, if not most, Zone 2 systems require you to output a native 2-channel signal from your source to your devices, or some that can downmix a multi-channel signal will also force you to listen to stereo in the main zone, rather than leaving it as surround sound in the main zone and only downmixing it to 2-channel for Zone 2. Mm-hmm. There's ways around this. It's annoying. So the Denon X3800 can downmix multi-channel sources, and it can keep surround sound or immersive audio playing in the main zone while providing a 2-channel downmix for Zone 2 at the same time. So that's great. Mm-hmm. The problem for Carlton is that you have to start the multi-channel source in the main zone first, and then activate Zone 2 and set it to source. For example, let's say your NVIDIA Shield is plugged in your HDMI 1 input. If you power on the main zone, select HDMI 1, start a Dolby Atmos signal playing, and then turn on Zone 2 and set it to source. It always works the way he wants. Atmos keeps playing the main zone, and the 2-channel downmix is created for Zone 2. And you could mute the main zone to just keep Zone 2 playing. Mm-hmm. But if you were to only power on Zone 2 and select HDMI 1 input, no sound comes out. The Shield would have to be outputting 2-channel stereo for this to work, and you can't select the special source input for Zone 2 unless they're already playing in the main zone.
Yeah.
He hasn't been able to get the commands in his Control 4 system to set up to make all of this easy. He has to start everything in the main zone and then manually activate then in Zone 2 and manually select the source as the input. Is there no better way?
I hear you. I feel your pain. I know how frustrating it is that it's like, well, there is a scenario where exactly what I wanted functions, but then there's all these other times where it's just a pain in the neck to get it to work. Right. Honestly, the only solution I've ever come up with is to add more sources. To add another NVIDIA Shield that is set to only output stereo, and when the only thing you want to do is turn on Zone 2, that's the source it gets sent to, and you have a second NVIDIA Shield that's just sitting there, always set to output 2-channel stereo. That will always work for your Zone 2. If you midstream decide you want to turn the main zone on, well, you're going to have to stop that NVIDIA Shield, turn on the other NVIDIA Shield that is set to output surround sound, multi-channel audio, and go through the rigmarole that you're already doing. But like, to me, that's been the least friction, is just having a second source dedicated to outputting a 2-channel signal for when you just want to turn on Zone 2 and nothing else. I know that doesn't sound terrific, but it is definitely one that can work in a Control 4 system, because just saying, when I want to only listen to Zone 2, here's the source to go to, and you just have that dedicated source ready for it. So I don't know if that was what you wanted to hear, but that's the only solution I honestly have for this scenario. Tom's thinking.
I'm thinking.
Yeah.
So with
because otherwise you have to switch the source. You have to tell the source to change, and that's way more commands than just having a second source that's ready to go.
Yeah, I guess my only other solution, because you can set sources like your input, your source. I know how to say it. Your input on your AV receiver, right? So there's the cable box, game system, media player, blah blah blah. You can have the same HDMI input feeding multiple sources.
Right. Yeah. Names of sources. So like when you're selecting the input, like on the remote of the AV receiver, it actually takes the signal from one HDMI port across two different like named sources. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess the only way I can think of to do this, other than what Rob said, is to to set more than one source. But then have, one of it, all of them grabbing the NVIDIA Shield.
Right.
Have the command set up so that one is just watch TV in the main room. One's watch TV in the main room.
And zone 2.
And one is just zone 2.
But then you would still have to have it send commands to the NVIDIA Shield for the Zone 2 only scenario, for the Shield itself to only output stereo, which, I mean, theoretically could be done with a macro programmed into your Control 4. But
that's what you have to do. I think you'd have to power on the main zone, because that's what happens, right? You have to power on the main zone and then mute it and then send it, and then power on zone 2, select source, and then but you'd have to do that all through a macro. That's the only other way I could think doing it.
Yeah,
Rob's solution is more expensive but easier.
It actually, like, that's why I say it's the only somewhat pain-free, other than paying the price for the additional source device that I've come across. So
it's and the problem here is, and I do empathize with you.
Yeah,
the problem here is you're weird. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but you are weird as far as customers are concerned to Denon.
Like it's a small number who are doing what you're doing. Yeah.
I would venture to say that there's people who have tried it and have not cared enough to even get to the point of trying to fix it. They're like, it doesn't work. And that's the end of that.
Yeah.
Or it works sometimes, it doesn't work other times. I don't really know why. So I don't use it anymore. Like, they don't care that much. It's like, I don't use this enough for it to be of something, to even write Denon and try to figure out if they can fix it for me. I was just at my parents' house yesterday. They're like, YouTube doesn't work. I'm like, what do you mean YouTube doesn't work? Like, oh, well, the YouTube doesn't work in the one device that they use that has apps on it. The YouTube app is not functioning the way they want it to. And I'm like, well, why don't you have a Chromecast? Why don't you just Chromecast doesn't work either. I'm like, well, let's see. Press the button, turn on Chromecast, cast it from a phone. It works just fine. But it's just, to them, it wasn't
too different.
worth.
Yeah, it's too much.
Yeah. They wanted to be able to use the remote. They don't want to have to grab their phone.
Yeah.
And for most people, that's what happens. They don't care enough to fix the thing that they want to fix. So, anyways, John wanted to follow up on our battery backup UPS advice to him, since he asked about either getting a single CyberPower 1500 VA PFC battery backup with pure sine wave output and a horizontal form factor that could go into his equipment rack, or two CyberPower 1500 VA units with stepped approximation of a sine wave and a tower form factor, either option costing about the same. At the moment, for his home theater gear, he has a Furman power conditioner that doesn't have voltage regulation or battery backup. We said that getting one of the pure sine wave units to protect most of his home theater gear would be great, but to leave his Crown XLS amplifiers plugged into the Furman, we said he shouldn't plug in his high wattage amps into a voltage regulator or battery backup unit. But just a double check. His main concern was the safety of his gear, not so much trying to continue using his home theater while the power is out. Unfortunately, in his neighborhood, the power goes out frequently, so we're talking 2 or more times almost every day, typically for less than 10 minutes at a time. Sometimes the outages are short enough that he doesn't have time to either unplug from the wall or set up all the power switches to off. So his gear is subjected to suddenly losing power and then getting power back in rapid succession. That can't be good, right? So we all seem to be in agreement that battery backup would be good for his sources, networking gear, and his prepo. But specifically, what about his Crown amps? Is there a battery solution of any kind that we would recommend for them? So the one I'm using, which I cannot even remember the name of it, I'm looking at it right now, does allow the full 15 amps through on some of the outlets. You could do that. As long as you have like surge protection. Because that's really what you're talking about here.
Yeah, because the cutting of the power isn't damaging to your gear. I know it seems it's shocking to us, right? Because we weren't expecting things to turn off and they just suddenly turn off. But cutting power to your electronics, other than something that needs a cooling fan to keep running, that isn't really an issue for something like an amplifier just having the power cut out. It's not really typically an issue. It's when the power suddenly comes back on. That's when you would normally possibly get a surge coming through your house. That could damage some gear. The firmware you already have is really good at protecting your gear for doing that. One of the things that they tout is that over voltage protection that it provides, non-sacrificial, which is great in a scenario like yours where it's happening frequently. You wouldn't necessarily want to be using metal oxide varistors like most surge protectors use that sacrifice themselves and then you have to buy more to replace them. So what you already have is almost the ideal protection for what you're doing, other than, of course, when the power does go out, you can't keep playing your amps. They just lose power. So yeah, I mean, normally in a scenario like this, I'd be like, what you would really want to do if you need that constant uptime, right? You just can't have 10 minutes where the power goes out and you wait. It has to be working all the time. Like in that scenario, that's where I would normally point to the very expensive online batteries, which is like you are always using the battery. Like even when the electrical grid is up and running, you're actually running everything off the battery and it's just constantly recharging that battery. The normal uninterruptible power supplies like the CyberPower that you're talking about, they're an inline, which is when the power grid is up and running, you're getting your power from the wall outlet, and when the power goes out, the battery kicks on. There is a little moment where the power's gone, but the battery kicks on within a couple of milliseconds and you don't notice the loss in power, but you're not running off the power continuously like the online ones. So the online ones would be from a company like SurgeX or from Furman. Furman sells online ones, but they are into the thousands of dollars. And for normally what you're talking about, that's kind of where I would end up pointing if you need that constant uptime. Otherwise, I think you actually already have the best solution. If you're okay with like, oh crap, power went out again, I'm going to be out for 2 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever it is, but it's going to come back, and that's not the part I'm worried about. The Furman you already have is really good at clamping down on that incoming surge, and that's the main worry.
Yeah, so the IO Gear Professional Online UPS is the one that I'm running in here, and basically when I contacted IO Gear and for the review and talked to them about like high current gear, what they basically told me was, as long as the maximum draw is not higher than the maximum output, this thing is fine.
Okay.
It'll be fine. So you should be fine. I have my receiver plugged into it, and I don't have any problems whatsoever. I do not have my subwoofers plugged into it, but I have everything else plugged into it.
And since he has like 4 Crown amplifiers going, he might need 2 of them, you know, to have enough
They're not
outlets.
cheap, they're like $700 a piece, but these things
like
can be daisy
$700
chained. Yeah, they can be daisy chained together, and you can just buy like extension units instead of like 2 of the same one.
Right.
So you check out the review and get an idea there. I still of the opinion that you just need surge protection, and the Furman does that. So I don't really think there's any reason to have the battery backup. If you don't care about the battery backup, because the battery backup is really for your things that need to cool down.
Yeah.
It's not for, I mean, literally anything else. So if it doesn't have a fan on it, you don't have to worry about it. So I would be okay with what you have, but that's just me. Joe, what are we doing time-wise here? I feel like
we've eaten up a lot. I don't know how many more we're going to get, but I hope a few more.
Joe, the AV Forum UK podcast hosted one of the founders from Dirac, and they discussed a little bit about target curves and among a great many other subjects. Joe found it interesting that even Dirac doesn't abide by some sort of set standard, as they talked about the dependence of your specific room, the seating distance, seating area, proximity to walls for the seats and your speakers, room acoustics, the measurement you take, and right down to sheer personal preference. They mentioned how in a near-field mixing studio, that response tends to measure very, very flat. But how that isn't the artist's intent, because mixers learn how things sound in their setup, but then they obsess over how their mixes translate to other rooms. So a room correction system's purpose isn't to make your large listening room sound exactly like a small near-field mixing studio. That system like Dirac, a system like Dirac should be removing resonances, peaks, and valleys. It should result in a smooth response, but a natural response for the room, which isn't normally a perfectly flat line like the small mixing studio anymore. Giving some of our recent discussions about personalized target curves, Joe just found it fascinating to hear one of the founders of Dirac basically saying there is no precise right or wrong for the target curve. curve. So it was just interested to hear a response to all of that. I agree. I think the whole idea here is for you. Okay. Our advice is to get you to the point where you can say, I got all the sounds.
Yep.
Let me change them to make them sound good to me.
Sure.
Okay. What I don't want you to do is say, I've bought all the equipment. It doesn't sound good. Now what equipment should I buy? Because that is not how, that's how audiophiles work. Audiophiles start talking about different power cords or speaker cable and, you know, little clocks and stuff like that to change the sound in their room rather than say getting the most accurate, like the speakers themselves, the room itself is just giving you what is on the disc. Now, if that's not what, you know, maybe the mixer was like, most people are going to be in very reverberant rooms. I'm going to take all the reverb out I can to ensure that whatever reverb the room adds will sound natural. And if you're like, you get everything out, you're like, man, this sounds clinical. Like this doesn't sound natural at all. Then you can start playing with the sound and with the DSPs and everything else that you might want to do. But you already know at that point that your speakers, your room, your setup has gotten out of the way and you're now hearing the sound itself. And anything you modify to it, to your personal preference, that's on you, man. I like it.
Yeah, I mean, it's always been the conundrum of, you know, like the Harman research, and I mean, even this comes up all the time when particularly Sean Olive, who's doing a lot of talking these days about the headphone target curve, right? Because they're really promoting that. But, you know, that headphone target curve, that Harman headphone target curve was derived from measuring the in-room response of a speaker that they knew was anechoically exceedingly flat and accurate, right? So there's these kind of multiple layers of translation, and there's the people who are concerned with like, okay, but the in-room preference that people have, is that actually right? Or is it just like what they're used to, or, you know, sounds the most like what they expect a real-life instrument to sound like in that room, but is that actually representing what the signal's said to play? Like, should we be hearing that completely linear anechoic response, or should we be hearing what we expect to hear or what we prefer to hear? Like, there's not a super easy answer to that. You know, I mean, I guess the simple idea is, yeah, if you just recreate the near field mixing studio with perfectly linear response, then you are hearing what the mixer heard, but as Dirac correctly points out, they're more concerned with how that translates to other systems. They're like, I know what it sounds like in here. So I know if it actually sounds a bit too trebly in my setup in this near-field mixing studio, but that actually translates well to real rooms. So this isn't necessarily how I, the mixer, would even prefer to listen to it played back. I just know that on my tools that I'm using to create it, this is the reading I want to get on my tool, so that when it is played back in a real room, it sounds pleasing, right? That's a weird, non-precise translation to try and have to guess at. It's really just experiential on the part of the mixer. Yeah.
I was listening to headphones this morning, and they're brand new headphones that I've not really listened to before, and I was playing a sweep, and I'm like, man, this sweep sounds very linear. I mean, it sounds incredibly linear, which is wrong.
Same volume throughout.
which is subjectively, it sounds very linear, which means it's wrong. I know it's wrong. Because a linear response from a headphone at anything less than reference volume should sound louder in the treble than it does in the bass.
Sure,
yeah. Because the bass, you're less sensitive to the bass, so therefore,
that's right.
And these headphones, like I could, and you'll see the review next week, or we'll talk about it next week. I could max out the volume on these headphones, and they were not too loud.
Okay.
You know, they were a little loud. They're like, I probably shouldn't be playing them this loud, but I could see myself doing it for a couple of songs I really like, sort of thing. So these were not loud headphones to begin with, and they're already down lower than that. And I'm like, if this sounds linear, something's incorrect. So I know, just from my experience of listening to a number of sweeps, that if you are like, you should, if you have it near reference level, you know, or a little bit below reference level, you should like want to turn it down when it gets to the treble.
Right. Yeah.
You should have to fight the urge. And if you don't, it means they're bass heavy, basically.
Yeah.
Or the treble is rolled off. And so that's exactly what he's talking about here.
Yeah.
So the question you have to ask yourself as a home theater enthusiast is, how does that translate into how you design or how you do your home theatering? Because if you're going for like super perfectly accurate, then, you know, are you really getting what they want, or are you getting something different? You know what I mean? And it doesn't go from one studio to the next, from one mixer to the next. It's not uniform. So
that's right.
Who knows?
It is imprecise, which of course makes people uncomfortable. For the type of people who obsess and have a little OCD about it and are like, I want to know that what I'm listening to is right. Well, I got bad news for you because it's fuzzy.
There is none. There is no right. You can only listen. You can only watch movies and experience music that was mixed by one person.
Right, yeah.
And they can never have changed their preferences or how they've mixed things over time.
I mean,
they sound exactly the same.
The BEQ guys do go to the extent of creating a brand new curve for every single movie they watch. So there you go.
Andrew asks, how much longer do we expect we will continue to refer to TVs, monitors, and projectors by a fixed resolution, like Full HD, 4K, 8K, instead of just speccing pixel density, which is already done for video walls and print applications? Get your desired screen size, get your pixel density, get your desired pixel density. That would make much more sense to Andrew. So when do we think consumers in the display industry will make that shift? How about never?
I don't know. I think the modular displays have a chance at that happening.
I still think they're going to be 4K, 8K, Full HD.
No, but I mean, if you do have a modular display that you're able to expand or choose a non-standard ratio, you know.
No, I hear you.
Yeah.
I hear what you're saying, but I think that people are still going to say, I sit here. You know, if we get to that point, I sit this far away from my TV and I want a 4K display.
Right.
How many modules do I need?
Okay.
You know, because I think that's what's going to end up happening. I don't see pixel density. The people are just like, they're not going to.
Yeah, because I mean, you know, phones and tablets, we go by pixel density because they aren't like standard resolutions anymore. So, but
do the marketing still do that though?
To some extent, yeah. I mean, it's mostly the tech nerds. It's definitely mostly the tech nerds who are
the tech nerds
even
that
looking
are like looking at the specs. But
we've kind of
gotten full 8K OLED screen on your phone.
And we've also kind of gotten to the point where it's like, yeah, you can literally have your nose pressed to your phone screen and still not be able to see an individual pixel because they've gotten that small and that dense. So, I mean, yeah, there does come a point where it doesn't matter how close you sit to your TV, you're not going to see a pixel. So then who cares? Like whatever it is, you've gone beyond what you need, right? So, yeah, I don't know. But yeah, if it's going to happen, it's going to be with the modular displays. That's my answer, Andrew. As far as it's as long as it's like a set size, you're getting this size of TV. If it's still worth anything to the marketing, they're just going to give the standard resolution. I don't think that's going to change.
I'm looking at the advertised, like the marketing for pixels.
Like a Google Pixel phone?
Yeah, Google Pixel phone, because that's what I would buy. So I'm just trying to see like how they market it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't see a screen.
It's not just going to be 4K because it's going to be some other weird resolution than that.
It's going to be super accurate Actua display, pixels brightest ever. That's all. There you go.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, because again, they've gotten so small and so dense that it just doesn't matter anymore.
Yeah. All right. How long is the next question?
Let's try to just do one more. I'll be happy with that if we can do that.
Steve feels like he's finally ready to get a second subwoofer. He's been using a single HSU VTF3 Mark V. He's got it positioned as an end table against the side of his L-shaped couch, and a lot of times people don't even realize it's a sub. They just think it's a table for his Amazon Echo and his TV remotes. He provided a not-to-scale diagram that you can see on the YouTube video or on the Flickr album, but it didn't give exact dimensions. It's an open space, though. Behind the seating area is open to the dining room, and there's a visual divider to the left with the kitchen on the other side, but it isn't actually a full wall that would separate air movement. And there's a doorway to the rest of the house in the front of the kitchen. So full pressurization down to 20 hertz is not the goal here.
No.
He's hoping a partner for its VTF3 Mark V might cost around $1,000, and that it wouldn't be great if it could, and it would be great if it could be smaller. Like an 11-inch cube would be ideal, but he knows that isn't realistic. Our favorite cylinder subs would just be too tall. So as compact as possible is what he's after. And he's also trying to figure out where to place a second sub directly across from his current HSU sub on the right wall would work, but would that actually be a good spot for acoustically speaking? Let's just... Oh, dang it, I'm not supposed to be touching that. Let's just start right now with, we have no way of knowing where to put this sub, and neither do you.
Not with, any level of predictable accuracy, no. Unfortunately, there's not much we can do on that
I'll
front.
be honest with you. So what I'm not hearing in any of this question is why. Why he wants a second subwoofer. Because what I'm hearing is... I'm ready to get that second sub because I know I need a second sub. And I'm going to say, do you really need a second sub? You're in this big, massive space.
Certainly, if he does care about the entire L-shaped couch, then if he's done the testing, I wouldn't be shocked if he said, okay, sounds pretty good in my main seat, but in the corner seat, the leftmost seat, it's pretty uneven there, and there's not much that a single sub is going to be able to do about that, but I don't know that that's the scenario, because if you kind of really only care about one seat and the other seats get what they get, then Tom might be very well right that a single sub
Rob's
is
going to suggest a subwoofer to you. I'm going to suggest that, I haven't looked at it yet, but I'm going to suggest that wherever you buy it from, hopefully SVS is what he's going to suggest, but I don't think it is. You can return it, because I very much feel like this is it's going to be a time when you're going to ask for a suggestion, we're going to give you a recommendation, and then you're going to come back with, it doesn't sound very good, and now where should I put it to make it sound good? And we're going to go, I don't know, maybe it'll never sound good. So I am of the opinion that if the bass is not too bad, if that's not why you're doing this, if you're doing this just because you think you need a second sub because everybody says you need a second sub, I'm going to say, don't listen to those people.
What strange sounding advice coming from us, but yes, Tom is getting into the nuance, the exceptions to the rule situations, and that's where you might find yourself for sure,
But if you think that getting a second sub will by default make your bass better, I am here to tell you that it could very well make your bass worse.
It could.
Or do nothing, which in some ways is even worse than that, because at least if it makes it worse, it did
because that's a bunch of money spent, and then you're like, why? Why did I spend it?
So money?
Given the current placement of the sub, if the idea is not to move the sub that you already have, anywhere other than where it already is, then it's pretty difficult to predict where a good placement for the second one is, because I don't actually even know from the diagram how much open space we're really dealing with, because the kitchen clearly isn't that skinny. Like, this is not to scale, and that isn't the entire kitchen. Where that doorway in the upper left corner of the diagram goes and how much air we're dealing with there, trying to predict the fluid dynamics of what's going on in this space, pretty much impossible.
Probably because there's hallways and everything else in here too.
Yeah, I mean, the basic rule of thumb is whatever space you're in, you try to get the two subwoofers as far apart and directly opposite of, crossing the center line of your space as you can, but that's going to be weird in here, right? What, are you going to have a subwoofer up against your garage door and then another one out in the hallway somewhere? That just practically obviously doesn't make sense. The chances that, directly horizontally across your room, like you've shown in your diagram, maybe that works, maybe it doesn't. I really don't know. But that is clearly not
like. I would be shocked if it worked.
Yeah, it's clearly not as wide across your space as it possibly could be. So,
they're physically separated enough that I would consider them not to be a single
They're not
sub,
co-located. Yeah.
But they're not that far off, to be honest with you.
So that part is very, very tricky.
If you think about like all the major subwoofer recommendations for placement, everybody that Harman and everybody has, the idea basically is they want the sub to be smack dab in the middle of the room, is what they want.
The phantom subwoofer.
The phantom sub would be there. So that's kind of how to think about this.
Right.
And if you look at your space, you're like, where could I put two subwoofers so that phantom sub would be in the middle of the room?
And also,
but I want the subs to be on a wall. at the same time.
And also, where is the center of this in completely irregularly shaped space?
Exactly, and that's why we're like, I don't know. Yeah. So I'm very hesitant to tell you to buy a subwoofer or to even suggest that it's a good idea.
Okay. Now, at the same time, if you are in the situation where you're like, I care about 5 seats across this L-shaped couch, I've listened to a sweep, played through my single sub in all 5 of those seats, and I'm like, one of these seats is okay, the rest are crappy, and that's why I want to get a second sub to try and help me out with that. Okay, it's worth a shot. I agree with Tom. Somewhere where you can return it without too much financial problem. Now, given what you said, I've got a suggestion. I don't think you're going to like it, but I don't know that there's much better that I could point you to, which is sticking with HSU. You're already familiar with HSU. You're already happy with the VTF3 Mark V, but its footprint is just way too big for the space you have. Now, they've introduced that brand new VTF TN1, which is basically the same output capabilities as actually the slightly more capable VTF 15H Mark II. That's still around there. Enough. But the VTF 3 Mark V was really, really close to that 15H. These are not mismatched subs in terms of output and extension. The TN1's claim to fame is that it has a smaller footprint because it's a bit taller. Now, it's nowhere near as tall as a cylinder sub. It's about 30 inches tall, so it is by no means short, but it's not like over 4 feet tall like the cylinder subs are. The footprint, though, is 18.5 inches square, right? So it's 18.5 inches wide, 18.5 inches deep. Now, that is considerably smaller than the 17.5 inch by 24 inch depth of your VTF3 Mark V, but it's still, obviously not an 11 inch square. Like you mentioned, it is way bigger than that and might be too big. It is bigger than the footprint of a cylinder sub. A cylinder sub is a circle that is 16.5 inches in diameter, so that is also a smaller footprint. So the thing is, if you actually consider more potential locations, I'm actually going to say for both subwoofers, that's asking a lot. That's the other thing
is you've been using the subwoofer and where it is for a long time, and everybody accepts it
as basically being an end table. Exactly,
it's fine where it is.
Yeah.
Buying that second subwoofer, you're like, I gotta move it now. So now you need an end table,
right? I'm looking at this and I'm like, having something where it's somewhere on your front wall and the other one is somewhere on that back wall. And of course, in this diagram, we don't have all the details of your room, but if that's possible, well then, hey, cylinders might work, right? You're saying in the spot that you've sort of picked out on that right-hand wall, the cylinder's too tall. I don't know if it's blocking a window or blocking something else, but it's too tall, but it's well, is that true for everywhere in your room? Because maybe in that right rear corner by the sliding glass door, a cylinder sub standing up there would make perfect sense. So that's the type of thing. Although now we're getting into definitely over $1,000. That VTF TN1 is $1,200, not $1,000. But in terms of massive output for this wide open room, wonderful extension, matching up well with the sub you already have, and sort of having a more agreeable form factor, I can't really point you to anything else that I think is less expensive and equally capable and still has a somewhat agreeable form factor to it. I like the VTF TN1 as a potential solution, but I still don't know if you'll be happy with that. But honestly, I don't really know where else to point you, right? Because if I start pointing you at way physically smaller subs, there's no point. They're not going to be able to contend with the volume of air that you've got going on. It would be a waste. I could point you to something like RSL's Speedwoofer 12S. It's amazing what it does at its $900 price point, but it's huge. I think it's actually a little bit bigger than your VTF3 Mark V because it's got a smaller diameter driver, but they put it in a bigger box to get that extension out of it. It's absolutely honking huge, so I don't think it fits the bill there. I don't have a fantastic answer for you, but that's the answer I'm giving.
That's exciting. All right, who do we have left?
We have on our list Mike, William, and John H. I think that's everybody, right? Yep, that's everybody who's still on the list.
All right, we want to thank our listeners of the week. We want to thank Steve for going to avrant.com, clicking on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link, and sending us a PayPal donation, as well as our 135 patrons over at patreon.com.
Yeah, Steve, thank you for that PayPal donation. And patreon.com/AVRant podcast is where you can go to sign up to make an automatic monthly donation if you'd like to. So big thanks to 135 patrons who are already doing that over there.
We want to thank Vince for trolling Lee, as well as Sasi for giving me permission to use the Subwoofer selection spreadsheet tool on AV Gadgets.
Yeah, thank you, Vince. I'm not going to contact Lee directly. We just want to organically find out how long that sits in his inbox. And Sasi, thank you very much for giving Tom permission. That's great.
We also want to thank those who sent us notes of gratitude from Ilango, Vince, Sasi, Steve, John, and Dazz. Thank you for thanking us.
And I'll say the names one more time. Ilango, Vince, Sasi, Steve, John, and Dazz. Thank you for your notes of gratitude and encouragement. We very much appreciate them. And a big, big thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions.
If you want to get your question answered, all you have to do is ask. You ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. For AVRant, I'm Tom Andry.
And I'm Rob H. Now go out and listen to something.
Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AVRant.
Now go out and listen to something.